This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. Where do you begin? I don't know. I'll just talk a bit, shall I? And then see whether a phone-in pops out at the end of the introduction. I was tempted, as I mentioned a moment ago, to do acts of kindness today. It's the World Happiness Report. It's got a Friday feeling. We may do it tomorrow from 12. More acts of kindness and generosity from human to human than at any other point since records began. That's got to be a cause of celebration. I've had one myself this morning. Oh, would you believe that the lovely Lisa Falconer, who you will know from her acting work as well as her cooking with her husband John Turode, just dropped off a lovely homemade hot cross bun for me before I came into the studio. And that's an absolutely lovely way to start the day, isn't it? And it ties in with the conversation we're not going to have about acts of kindness, because we have to have a conversation about whatever the opposite of kindness is: acts of cruelty, acts of evil, acts of awfulness. I had to speak yesterday. I love doing things like this because it allows you to see the world from a very different angle. And by world, I mean my professional life. I spoke to the advertising people yesterday. I gave a little speech about what's going on and stuff. And they asked brilliant questions. One of them being, how do you decide how much to talk about what's going on in the United States? And I don't know the answer. I didn't know the answer. You know that I've started keeping track of stories that I think you might have missed because of the old thing about flooding the zone. Simon Marks explained it to us all so beautifully this week, that the challenge is to even simply to stay up to date. So I've shared probably half a dozen stories with you already this week, some of which you won't have been aware of, some of which I wasn't aware of until they pinged on my radar. People now sending them to me on Blue Sky in case I've missed them. One of the latest being that the absence of evidence is actually evidence of guilt. This is in the context of the deportations of Venezuelans to El Salvador. The acting field office director of ICE has said that the lack of a criminal record does not indicate that they pose a limited threat. The argument is that if they haven't got a criminal record, that just shows that they haven't been caught yet. I want you to think about that for a moment. There's a rather wonderful novel you may be familiar with by Joseph Heller called Catch-22. And Catch-22 is you can't get sent home from the war on mental health grounds, because if you want to get sent home from the war, you can't possibly be mentally ill. It's such a sane and rational response to having been conscripted into military service in a hideous war. It's Vietnam, isn't it? Catch-22, it's not Korea. I'm pretty sure it's Vietnam. Major, Yossarian. It's an amazing book. I haven't read it for a while, as you can probably tell from the fact that I've forgotten which war it's based on. But you cannot be sent back from the war, because if you ask to be sent back from the war on mental health grounds, then you can't possibly be mentally ill, because asking to be sent home from the war is such a sane and rational thing to do. And that's Joseph Heller's magnificent Catch-22. Have we got time for a quick name drop? Do you mind if I do? Can I do a quick name drop? I met Joseph Heller. Can you imagine what that felt like for a sort of 20-something literature geek? I met Joseph Heller when I was a gossip columnist, went to one of his book launches. And I'd love to tell you that this conversation actually took place, but I can't remember. I think I might have printed the legend. It's such an iconic conversation in my memory that it seems unlikely to me that I had the nerve to ask him this question. I did have a little habit when I was a gossip columnist of asking questions that made everybody else go quiet, because I was so desperate to get a line for the next day's newspaper. But I think somebody else asked him this, and I've just remembered. It's the Second World War. It's the Second World War in Italy. Of course it is. Sorry. And so I'd like to tell you that I asked Joseph Heller if it bothered him that he'd never written a book as good as his debut. He'd never written another book as good as Catch-22. But I don't think it was actually me that did it. The point is, his answer was a thing, his purported or apocryphal or actual answer, doesn't really matter. It's a thing of such unalloyed beauty that you, when I tell you in a moment what he says in response to that question, you will never forget it. Does it bother you, Mr. Heller, that you've never written another book as good as Catch-22? And he'd written loads subsequently. Some of them are brilliant. Do you know what he said? He said, nobody has. That is such a mic drop moment, isn't it? Does it bother you that no one's written a book as good as your debut? Nobody has. And he's kind of right. But there you go. So there's Catch-22. Written as satire, now government policy. If we haven't caught you committing any crimes, it's proof that you're really good at committing crimes. and therefore we're going to deport you. That is what is now happening. And that's just one of the things that you may not be aware of. Another involves the mayor of Miami proposing to close a movie theatre because it screened, and wait for it, an Oscar-winning documentary about the war in Gaza, about the war between Israel and Hamas. The mayor of Miami Beach in Florida, a man called Stephen Miner, proposed to actually end the lease and cut the funding of a movie theatre that screened an Oscar-winning film that is balanced in its coverage of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's withdrawn it now after epic protest. A city commission saw speaker after speaker after speaker line up to denounce the decision, to denounce the proposal, and he has now withdrawn it. But that is another example of what is going on in the United States. He stands accused in this country of undermining our own legal system with his crackdown on diversity policies. You know, yesterday I told you that they're removing photographs, evidence, testimony of service personnel, men and women of colour, who were, by any definition, military heroes. But the idea is that because they are black or brown or mixed race or from any or Native American or from any ethnic minority, and they appear on official government documents, they can't be there because of their heroism. They must be there because of their ethnicity. It's white supremacism in its boldest and most garish form. And yet we are beginning to lose our grip on it because there is so much of it. And of course it matters because there are UK law firms, London-based law firms now being ordered by the Trump administration to reveal the ethnic details of their staff. They have to clarify whether race is considered in partner promotions or if, quotes, diverse, end quotes, candidates are subject to less rigorous testing during hiring, trying to create this idea that any person of colour who gets a good job is only there through some form of positive discrimination, culminating in a combination of two press secretaries, one of whom, an outgoing press secretary, a woman of colour who had an incredible CV, both academic and professional, being described as a diversity hire by fans of Donald Trump, whose press secretaries, I think, struggle to use crayons and have absolutely no qualifications or credibility whatsoever, except, of course, blind loyalty to the Mango Mussolini. And these are just little things that are happening. And I've tried, and I continue to try. There are Hungarian echoes, European echoes, things happening in authoritarian states beyond the United States that are almost certainly a consequence of these leaders feeling empowered by what Donald Trump is doing. So in Hungary, they've banned the Pride March. Literally, just banned the organisers of the Hungarian Pride movement from marching. If we can't assemble freely, what will happen next? Asked the leader of the centrist Momentum Party. So just banning it, that's just homophobia as government policy. Quite incredible. In Turkey, Erdogan has had his major political rival arrested as he does quite poorly in the polls. Ekrem İmamoğlu's presence as mayor of Istanbul has become increasingly unbearable for the authoritarian leader of Turkey. The election's not till 2028. He's already locked up his biggest rival, or he's already had his biggest rival arrested. Incredible. And the consequence of what is happening in the United States, what is being made normal in the United States. And then this story here, which I think, I don't know why I just said think instead of think. It's quite endearing though. I think this story here might be that moment we've been waiting for, where the big stuff happens and we don't properly notice because we're drowning in all the other stuff. And by big, I mean epochal and international. I mean world order. I mean end of Pax Americana. All the other stuff is just increasing evidence of fascism. Make no mistake, all right? Locking people up or describing innocent people as guilty because we just haven't caught them yet, deporting people who've not committed any crimes, shutting down media outlets like Voice of America, prosecuting people and threatening to deport them for protesting peacefully against Israel's actions in Gaza. I mean, fascism. But if you're not seeing it yet, then you're a fan of it. It's over. The hope, the pretense, the conversation about whether it is or whether it isn't, it just is. calling Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator, trying to humiliate him in the White House. This is not negotiating tactics or the art of the deal, a book, of course, he didn't even write and hasn't read, but upon which his reputation rests among the, what do you even call them? But this is mad, right? And remember, because he has such power, you cannot just ignore him. Whether you're me, whether you're Volodymyr Zelensky, or whether it's you. You cannot ignore someone wielding such enormous power, tempting though it may be to switch off occasionally. But yesterday, he asked for Ukrainian power plants. He literally suggested that Ukraine should hand over its power plants to the United States of America. And of course, by United States of America, given Elon Musk's proximity to the project, we know that the amount of crossover between personal financial interest and public finances is now almost complete. You remember Jimmy Carter put his peanut farm into a trust, into a blind trust, so that there couldn't be any conflict of interest between his presidency and his financial status as a private citizen. He put a peanut farm into a blind trust. Trump continues to use and promote his golf courses, his hotels, and way beyond that in the context of his own presidency. He sees it as, among other things, a money-making exercise. And this seems to me to be one of those moments that the flooding of the zone is designed to disguise. Listen, I could be wrong. Of course I could. But I haven't been yet on Trump or Brexit or Boris Johnson or Liz Truss or austerity. I could be wrong on this. It may not be the equivalent to, let us say, Winston Churchill Winston Churchill, because the Americans weren't in the war at the time, suggesting to the Prime Minister of Poland that we will only go to war against the Nazis if you give us all your coal mines. You give us all the profits from your coal mines. We'll come and fight for you if you let us have the coal mines. Nazis move into France, on the phone to de Gaulle. Yeah, all right, we'll help. I suppose you'd have to deal with Vichy, wouldn't you? We'll help. Just give us all your coal mines. Oh, can we have the Eiffel Tower as well while you're at it? But I'll tell you what, we'll just take the Champs-Élysées. Give us Versailles. It's incredible, right? And yet we're now in a place where it's not front page news. I don't know whether it is in the United States of America. It doesn't merit an editorial comment in some of our newspapers, of course, almost all of which, certainly the Brexit-leaning ones, are yet to atone for or apologise for suggesting that a Donald Trump presidency would be brilliant. I remember Jacob Rees-Mogg wrote an article for The Telegraph about how it would be absolutely fantastic for Britain, and indeed it would make Brexit a glorious success if Donald Trump got into the White House. I suppose we should be grateful for small mercies. He's gone very quiet lately. But to ask for ownership of the plants, the power plants, as some sort of, well, if you don't give them to us, then maybe Mr. Putin will continue blowing them up, is a moment of, I think, fairly high significance, because it speaks to a complete corruption of the order. So I don't know that a phone-in has popped out at the bottom of these pontifications yet. Do you? I mean, the obvious one would be, do you agree? I mean, is Trump's offer to take over the power plants in Ukraine in return, well, not even in return for much, just in return for a verbal suggestion that Russia will be less likely to bomb them if they belong to the United States than they would be if they continue to belong to the Ukrainian people or the Ukrainian state. That's incredible, right? I don't know who's qualified to comment on whether or not it's the equivalent to Winston Churchill predicating support for Poland after the Nazis invaded upon them handing over all of their coal mines, or support for France, defence of France, depending on them handing over the Eiffel Tower or the Palace of Versailles. I don't know if it is. I just think it might be. And then I turned to an article, a very good article in The Guardian today by Martin Kettle, which posits the existence of an Atlantic alliance of which America is not a part. And it speaks generationally. It reminds us that this stuff is not going to be confined now to one presidential term. I mean, again, We could have a phone-in about how confident you are there'll be an election in 4 years' time. Hand on heart, how confident are you that there will actually be a full, free and fair election? The next time it is due in the US election cycle. We may get an indication of how likely that is next year in the midterms. But this headline here, Europe can build a new NATO and it doesn't need Trump. An Atlantic alliance without the United States. It sounds like a contradiction in terms. Hamlet without the prince. Yet this is the improbable, disjunctive world that we now inhabit. It is one in which our children and our grandchildren will live their lives. So there are two questions popping out the bottom of this pontification monologue. It's not a rant, is it? I'm far too chill today for it to be called a rant. But the first is, that's just true, isn't it? It's incredible, still incredible. We're only 2 months in, and we need to see the world through entirely different lenses. We need an Atlantic alliance, a Western alliance, without the United States. Question, don't we? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. We just do, don't we? And you can answer no to that question, but is it time now? I mean, how can it not be time now to redraw the rules? And then the more important question kicks in. And I'm asking a lot of you today. Again, I'm going to warn you that I mean, I'm glancing at the clock. Keith's looking a bit sweaty. I need to knock this on the head now and go to some adverts, but I've got a lot more to say. I'd rather not say it. I'd rather have a conversation with you next. But this is a big ask. Is the world as we know it over? Is the Atlantic alliance involving the United States dead for generations? 0345 6060 973. But here's the bit I want. What will it look like next? What does it mean? So a little bit on the 150 billion bucks that the EU is going to start spending on weapons, and at the moment none of it is going to be spent with British firms. I'll tell you a little bit more about that before the end of the hour, but that gives you an indication. The French even want to tie it in with fishing rights in order to open up the business to British companies. That's a mad little reminder of how mad it is to be out of the European Union. But what's it going to look like? What does a Western alliance without the United States look like? 0345 6060 973. So there's two ways into this, both heading for the same destination. I don't think you can really challenge the thesis that we are living through a period of unprecedented recalibration, all right? In the West, the Western world as we know it is going to be changed beyond all recognition by Donald Trump's second presidency. Agree or disagree? Give me a call. Crucially, if you agree, what's it going to look like? What does it mean? What do we have to do? What do they have to do? How does it evolve? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:23 is the time, and you know, on the list of things that are drowning out the big stuff, we add reports that a French scientist on his way to a conference in the United States has reportedly been denied entry by Customs and Border Patrol over messages found on his phone that criticised President Trump's science cuts. Also stories of a German green card holder being brutally treated by immigration officials as a consequence of I know not what. But the idea that this is not a fascistic takeover, a far-right revolution happening in real time on the other side of the Atlantic is becoming increasingly impossible to challenge or resist. So if things are changing in ways that none of us really expected or thought would happen in our own lifetimes, what does it mean? What does it mean? That quick story about what is happening with regard to money, I gave you the bare bones of it, but $150 billion Europe has agreed, European Union has agreed, euros even, to form a defence fund. At the moment, none of that money can be spent with British arms companies because we are not members of the European Union. It will consider purchasing British weapons only if Keir Starmer signs a security pact with Brussels that France has sought to tie to, wait for it, seriously, fishing rights. Bloody Brexit. Well, I mean, say what you like about Nigel Farage. He certainly didn't let the fishermen down, did he? You know, remember he used to wang on about fishing all the time. And he certainly looked after them and not walked away with barely a backward glance as their situation deteriorated and diminished. So that is it, really. Are we looking at a new world order? And if we are, what will it look like? Let's cross to Ireland first. Jerry's in Sligo. Jerry, what would you like to say?
Well, James, frankly, I think the die is cast.
Yes.
The problem is not Trump, essentially. The problem is the 70-plus million Americans who put Trump there. So even if Trump were gone in 2 weeks' time, for some ridiculous reason, the issue is still there. The Americans have turned inwards and they've closed their face to the world. The ludicrous nonsense about the EU having been formed to upset America, for God's sake. Yes. Anyway, never mind any of that. The facts of the matter are there is going to be a redrawing of a new world order because there has been, and it's been forced upon us by 70-plus million Americans.
I mean, I wonder whether we underestimate the unique nature of Trump's diabolical genius. You know, I watched J.D. Vance lying and talking gibberish, and I don't worry. I think, yeah, all right, he might bring some people with him, but you can tell that he's a balloon, can't you? You can tell that Captain Eyeliner is not going to be able to whip up aircraft hangars full of people into murderous frenzies before setting them loose upon the seat of his own country's government. Trump is possessed, whether we like it or not, of something quite different, and therefore, sine Trump, perhaps the recalibration begins to reverse. That's the closest I can get to optimism, Jerry. So tread carefully because you tread upon my dreams.
I think you're spot on. He has a unique sort of charisma. Well, I personally wouldn't see it, but sure. He does resonate with certain people. I'm sorry to say, and again, I don't wish to be disparaging of the entire American nation. But, I mean,
just as well, Jerry. Just as well.
70 plus million of them haven't had the wit.
But what if they
they
voted for cheaper eggs? They voted because they think Michelle Obama is a man. They voted because do you know what I mean? The effort put in.
What does that tell you, James?
I don't know.
What does that tell you?
I don't know.
It tells you that you're dealing with people who, for God's sake, they haven't the wit to find their way through what's going on in their own country.
But hasn't that always been true when dictators arrive in power through democracy? And I don't think it's unique to the United States. It's a human condition, not an American condition.
Oh, I agree with that, but you would never have expected it to land on America, with their approach to things,
You might have Conor McGregor. You might have Conor McGregor running for office over there soon.
Perish the thought.
Well, and then what do we say without wanting to malign the entire island of Ireland? But what if he managed to secure enough support to make his way into office, into power?
James, I've got 40 quid here in my pocket. No, euros.
Euro, please.
40 euros here in my pocket, which I'm prepared to have with you. McGregor will never see the light of day.
I don't think I'm allowed to take that bet for broadcast regulatory reasons. But let's say metaphorically, I think your money's safe, and you know it. But a quick word actually, while you're here, when he turned up in the Oval Office and almost was posited by Trump as the spokesperson for Ireland, the representative of modern Ireland, how did that make you feel?
Well, I mean, to be honest, buffoonery. I mean, two buffoons sort of wrapping their arms around each other. Trump seems to derive some sort of pleasure at being obnoxious.
Yes.
Look how far I can push you, and look how far I can go with you.
Yes.
The other guy is just a complete cretin. I mean, for God's sake. It would be like trying to apply sensible commentary to watching two roosters in a hen house bashing each other. There's no sense in it.
Jerry, thank you, and thank you for just avoiding the maligning of the entire population of the United States, or even the 70 million that were tempted to vote for Donald Trump, because I wonder how many of them have buyer's regret, buyer's remorse. That's another phone-in, of course. How can he still be enjoying approval ratings in the 40s? I mean, lower than they were, and the headlines are lowest ever. But I don't read those headlines with a sense of optimism or happiness. I read them with a sense of shock and horror that 40-odd% of people can think he's doing a good job, even as he removes people like Jackie Robinson, the baseball legend, from official military history. He's been restored now because the outcry was loud enough. But all the other transgressions, all the other obnoxiousness will not prompt a loud enough outcry because there is so much of it. Here's the line. There was only one catch. And that was Catch-22. I feel I should be doing this in an American accent, but I won't inflict that on you, largely because it will probably come out Welsh. There was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's own safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind. Or, that's the character, O-R-R, or was crazy and could be grounded. All he had to do was ask, and as soon as he did, he would no longer be crazy and would have to fly more missions. Or would be crazy to fly more missions and sane if he didn't. But if he was sane, he had to fly them. If he flew them, he was crazy and didn't have to. But if he didn't want to, he was sane and had to. Yossarian was moved very deeply by the absolute simplicity of this clause of Catch-22 and let out a respectful whistle. That's some catch, that Catch-22, he observed. It's the best there is, Doc Danica agreed. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Sure, anyone's going to have a proper crack at challenging the idea that the world is changing in ways that none of us expected, and not, of course, for the better, which leaves us with the question of what it's going to look like. What does an Atlantic alliance without the country on the other side of the Atlantic look like? What does it mean? It could be the a catalyst that speeds up the undoing of Brexit. But remember, that depends on public opinion and public feeling. And public opinion is very easily manipulated. It's part of the reason why Trump's approval ratings remain relatively high, given the horrors that he's undertaking. Some people suggesting that most people won't even know what's going on. The local affiliates in the UK media, one of my Blue Sky correspondents, in the US media, one of my US correspondents tells me are not covering the stuff that's happening at a federal level. And speaking of manipulating the public, I'm not on Twitter anymore, as you know, but Adam Bienkov has drawn my attention to, via his Blue Sky account, Adam, a political editor at Byline Times, to a post that yesterday had 28,000 retweets and 93,000 likes. And it is a completely false claim that Sadiq Khan is building 40,000 new homes exclusively for Muslims that will be near mosques and halal food shops. And that's how the population is being manipulated. That's why Elon Musk bought Twitter. That's a verified account. It's got a blue tick on it, and it is posting absolute lies. And remember, when absolute lies posted by far-right Twitter accounts with impunity after the Southport killing started spreading vile lies, people ended up setting fire to hotels full of human beings. That's on the platform. But again, that's a conversation for a different day. 10:35 is the time. Back to the new world order and what on earth it's going to look like. Indy is in Aberfoйлin in Scotland. Indy, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I'm a bit nervous. This is my first time calling.
It's only me.
You say that, yeah, but I'm still nervous. I kind of agree that there will be like a new world order for the West, but I kind of do that with a caveat. I kind of hope that the American people are going to put a stop to it themselves. Because from what I'm seeing in America is grassroots activism is coming up, and more Americans are starting to pay attention to what's actually going on, because it's not just affecting trans people now. It's not just affecting somebody that you can't identify with. It's affecting everyone, and it's affecting their pockets. And I don't think Trump's going to make the 4 years, quite frankly. I just can't see it.
Well, what does resistance look like, though?
Well, the trouble is I feel that politicians are letting us down, both sides.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few progressive politicians in America that are doing their job. But then when you have Schumer giving things like walking into closure, not closure and stuff like that, then he's just kind of giving anything probably had away. And
well, I don't want you to.
It's just up to the people.
I don't want you to talk your way out of your optimism, or rather, I don't want to talk you out of it. But you are kind of doing that, because you derive some optimism from the activism that you're exposed to. I counter with the public opinion poll ratings, which are dipping but not plummeting, and the really bad stuff is happening early and it's not turning to people's heads. Joanne writes that the local and regional TV stations in USA, like Fox 13, are just ignoring the federal changes being made. People are not engaged in politics or even tornado damage. It's spring breaks, getting Walmart deliveries and just going about their everyday life. So where does the push come? I mean, when I say what does the recalibration look like? Are you talking about some form of public protest? You mean like an Arab Spring in the United States?
I think it's more grassroots than that. I think
well, what does
people
that
forget
mean?
that,
Sorry to badger you, but what do you mean by that?
Minorities and us people, I'm non-binary and I'm autistic, etc. And it's people like us that have always been minorities have to fight up against things. And I think if you look at social media where most people are influenced, rather than Fox News and your traditional television, it's social media that kind of holds the most weight,
and
sadly.
social media is where that thing I just read out to you about Sadiq Khan's complete lies.
Twitter,
so how does that create the impetus for resistance? It's not a coincidence that Elon Musk has bought it. It's not a coincidence that they're going after DEI first before they go after any other people, because I suppose they're shutting down the things that you see as the most likely engines of change, the most likely engines of resistance.
If you look at what's happening in America, the law itself and the Constitution has been holding up. So things like the gender-affirming ban is now being upturned. Abortion in Arizona has been upturned. And I can have a belief in the system, and I believe in the power of the people to defeat something like this. Do I think that as the West we should go along with America? No. I think we should kind of let them off just now, because you're dealing with someone that's got the mindset of a toddler that's not going to do anything.
I hear you, and I genuinely want to leave your optimism untarnished, but I don't share it, because you talk about the rule of law, you talk about the Constitution, and I remind you that he literally carried on deporting people after a judge had ordered him not to, and then calls for a judge to be impeached for handing down a verdict that he doesn't like. You do see, the closest I ever get to a conspiracy theory is wondering whether Suella Braverman is really bright enough to have come up with attacks on the UK judiciary and the maligning of peaceful protesters, peaceful pro-Palestinian protesters as Hamas supporters, and even attacks upon the police with regards to the policing of remembrance ceremonies. You do wonder whether she's actually bright enough to have come up with all that stuff by herself, because now you're seeing what happens when it becomes official government policy in the United States, and it's a playbook written by the far right, and it's called, of course, Project 2025, which is why I wish I could somehow absorb. I'm going to give Keith a quick heads up here. I'm going to use that word, Keith, that we haven't properly greeted with the noise that we used to greet it with for about 5 years. Should we give it a go? I wish that I could somehow absorb some of Indy's optimism by a process of emotional or intellectual osmosis. Don't ask me why we started playing the Hallelujah chorus whenever somebody said that word back in the... I can't even remember, but we used to do it pretty well. Thank you, Indy. Sarah's in Warwick. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. Would you like a silver lining?
Well, go on then.
Would you like a silver lining? Would you like a silver lining that's made of mercury and is going to poison us all?
I don't know now. Go on. What did you ring in to tell me?
I would like to draw your attention to the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics.
Yes. Is it Paul Krugman?
And what they were looking at...
Go on.
So they've got James Robinson, Darren Akameglu, I believe it's pronounced, and Simon Johnson.
Yes.
And they were looking at why some countries are rich and why some countries are poor.
Yeah.
And before their work, everyone was thinking, oh, it's due to natural resources or the echoes of colonization. It's due to all of these sorts of other things. And they really looked at it and studied hard and did the maths, and they came to the conclusion that it is down to the strength of a country's institutions, whether or not there's a strong judiciary, whether or not there's a strong civil service. So it no longer matters whether we think America might be going up or down or sideways.
Yeah.
There is a Nobel Prize that says that when you hack apart your own institutions, you go down. And it's not me saying this. There is a Nobel Prize
Nobel laureate.
for economics.
Societies with a poor rule of law and institutions that exploit the population do not generate growth or change for the better. Gosh, I'm going to put you top of the class today. That is. Well, hang on. What was the bit about the mercury? Don't spoil it, Sarah, because it was Sligo. You know, when I was talking to Jerry in Sligo, I quoted W.B. Yeats, who's actually from Sligo. Only Michelle noticed that. Tread carefully, for you tread upon my dreams. I don't know any poets from Warwick off the top of my head. If I did, I'd have dropped a couple of lines in there for you. But what's the mercury bit? And don't ruin it all.
Well, look at what the impact of that is going to be.
Oh, I see.
A weakening America means we are standing on our own, and it is now inevitable that we stand on our own. So really, it's no longer a question of, is there a new world order? It's when it's going to arrive and what we need to do to prepare for its arrival.
Where does post-Brexit Britain fit into it? I wonder if even by, and this show has a fairly good track record when it comes to pointing out the idiocy of Brexit. I wonder whether we ain't seen nothing yet. I wonder whether it's going to look like an even more ridiculous and stupid and boneheaded decision than it does already as a direct consequence of what you're just describing and the fact that we are no longer in, cheek by jowl with the largest single market on the planet, and increasingly with a major international defence force. We are outside.
But there is also an advantage that we now know a way forward to strengthen ourselves, which is to strengthen our own institutions.
Yeah, well, and it's odd, isn't it,
we have a strong judiciary.
People like Suella Braverman are continually launching attacks upon our own institutions. It's almost as if that wasn't a coincidence. I suppose technically, Shakespeare's from Warwickshire, isn't he?
Stratford, just down the road, yes.
Well, I mean, I don't know where the boundaries were at the time of his birth, but I'd claim him for Warwickshire. Listen, if Coventry can call itself Warwick, if the university in Coventry can call itself Warwick University, I think we can let Shakespeare be.
That's very true.
So when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, there's a little line about Donald Trump, but whether or not enough eyes can see it at the moment, I do not know. Or what about beware my lord of jealousy? It is the green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds on, and we all know how that ended for Othello. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well played, Dell points out Yates is a Sligo man, but by way of Chiswick. So it's actually true that a lot of people don't realise that Yates had a long association with Chiswick. You think I'm making it up, but it's true. I got a lot of stuff to get through today, including a rather splendid missed information. And Natasha has been spending some time with Ed Davey, who I don't think, and I know a lot of you agree, gets anything like the sort of attention that he should be getting, given the shifting political sands in this country, given the quality of his performances at PMQs, and given the number of MPs he has, none of whom I don't think he's had to suspend. And equally, I'm fairly confident none of them have ever served time for beating up a British woman. I only mention the ethnicity of the woman beaten up by a Reform MP because Reform supporters like to pretend that they care passionately about acts of violence committed against, quotes, our, end quotes, women, except when they're voting for one. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. I may have been pretending a bit. It may have been a performative pretense a moment ago. I think I can remember where the Hallelujah chorus came into the programme back in the day. But Corpsey has gone definitive. He says, the Hallelujah chorus was brought in because you are terrible at science and answered osmosis to any question you didn't understand during Mystery Hour, and then one day you were right. That sounds perfectly plausible to me, don't you think? That's one day, yeah. I still remember that day fondly. So yeah, that is why. I think we only played the chorus when it was correct, but then I started getting it wrong so often again that it became impossible to judge, and that's probably why it withered on the vine and ceased to be a feature of the show. The other thing I used to do, I'm just killing a bit of time now while we hook up our connections to Jerusalem, where Noga Tarnopolski is poised to join us. But it's quite interesting because the other thing I used to do is play a basically alarm. And that would involve whenever anybody, because I wanted to excise the word basically from our discourse together, this end and that end. I'll tell you the end of that story later because Noga Tarnopolski is in Jerusalem, a freelance journalist who has been of enormous help to us in unpicking the detail of the continuing conflict and, crucially, I think, the domestic political situation in Israel. It's probably fair to say, Noga, that you derive no pleasure whatsoever from having been proved right about almost everything. So let's just pick up on a couple of recent developments. Protesters in Israel have accused Benjamin Netanyahu of ordering the latest round of airstrikes to provide, quotes, cover for a campaign to dismantle Israel's democratic system and maintain his own grip on power. And these are groups representing Israeli hostages. We know that one of the far-right previous members of his cabinet, has reopened cooperation as a consequence of the fighting recommencing. We know that Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, opposed the ceasefire deal from the start. And we know latterly that the latest round of assaults overnight, ground assaults, deal a blow to any hopes of restoring the fragile truce with Hamas, the nature of the ground attacks, ground operations, raising fears for the hostages. So even the London Times goes with the headline, Israel launches ground assault on Gaza in blow to hostage hopes. That pretty much covers it, I think.
Yes, that covers it. And you're calling me today on a historic day. And you're right that it gives me absolutely no pleasure to report on what's happening here, but I think it's important to report. The maybe you can find an image of this for your listeners. The cover page of the widest read newspaper in Israel, the tabloid Yediot Achronot. It's the most popular paper. What it says on the cover today is there are no adults in the room.
Wow. And
the leader is a story about how the government is perpetrating a coup d'etat today, is getting rid of the last gatekeepers, doing so illegally. And all this, it says, is happening while Israel is sinking into the Gazan mud. So what you just said is now a widespread, acknowledged by even the most mainstream media outlets. It's not just an opposition thing right now.
I've got the front page, and I will share it with my listeners, but it is in Hebrew, so I don't know how many of them are going to be able to. I don't know how many of them are going to.
That's a good point. But I thought, just the graphic layout is dramatic.
Absolutely.
You see this big headline in the middle of the page. The leaders of all free media in Israel today are similar, but the one in Yediot is very dramatic.
Yes.
And this really a quick description of the manner in which Netanyahu has gone about dismantling all of the system, the parliamentary system of Israel's democracy, such that today there is not really an independent parliament. There's not an independent even cabinet. You don't have a cabinet with a variety of opinions. And he's planning to vote to get rid of the head of the Domestic Security Agency tonight. This is an illegal vote. It has been determined not to be a legal move by the Attorney General, and Netanyahu plans to vote to fire that Attorney General on Sunday, at the beginning of next week.
Because, we can speculate as to the why, but there's no speculation in saying the Attorney General is investigating corruption allegations made against key aides of Netanyahu.
Yes, the public prosecution is doing that investigation, actually. There have been really incredible revelations in the last 2 days, undenied. Important to say, undenied revelations that show that some of Netanyahu's top aides, some of the people closest to him inside the bubble of the Prime Minister's office, were on the Qatari payroll during this war, also before the war, but during this war. And his top media aides were working for him and simultaneously running a PR campaign for Qatar. I can quote former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who is no lefty himself, who said that if Netanyahu knew about it, then we're talking about an investigation into treason on the part of the Prime Minister. And if he didn't, it's one of the gravest security breaches in the history of the state. So Netanyahu, who is already on trial for corruption, as you remember, is now attempting to just dismantle the entire system when faced with these new charges or new suspicions.
How much support does he personally still enjoy in Israel?
He enjoys very little support. He enjoys somewhere between 20%, maybe some polls show up to 25%. The vast majority of Israelis, around 73% of Israelis, said in a poll run by the nonpartisan Israel Democracy Institute about 10 days ago, said he should resign. And thousands of Israelis have taken to the streets in the last 2 days. Since he announced he was firing, the head of the Shin Bet, there have been spontaneous and then organized protests of, tens of thousands at least people. The issue is that it appears that Netanyahu's understanding of these polls, or the consequence of these polls and these protests, from Netanyahu's point of view, is not to say that maybe he should go, but to propel him to hold on ever tighter.
Of course.
Because he's an unpopular and weak prime minister.
And when he goes straight from the prime minister's house to the dock in a criminal court.
That's right. And he's scheduled to be testifying tomorrow. He tried to get out of his testimony again this week. This time the court put a stop to him. I have to say one thing. It really does appear that Netanyahu's confidence in himself and his determination to just shatter the system of parliamentary democracy in Israel has gotten a big boost from Netanyahu's interactions with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Now,
you've literally just preempted my next question, so I'll just keep quiet and let you carry on. No, that's it. I mean, how big a difference has Trump made to this situation?
A very big difference. Netanyahu has been wanting to pursue this kind of autogolpe, right? This coup d'etat against himself, apparently, right? As a legitimately elected prime minister, he's trying to a power grab. And he's been wanting to do this since he formed this government, which was December 29th of 2022. His only public policy initiative, the government's only initiative ahead of the Hamas attack of October 7th, was this attempt to recreate Israel as basically a country run by an unfettered executive. Netanyahu last night put out many statements, one of which was a video in which he's seen sauntering around the Knesset. This was put out around midnight, and he points to a potted plant and said, "This is what the Attorney General wants me to be." But no, and he's arguing that the deep state, he uses this term, that the deep state is trying to unseat him, that this is a cabal, he says, of leftist anti-democrats, wow. I'm quoting,
yeah.
And that he is the one who's going to restore equilibrium to the state of Israel. So, it's very widespread here. In Israel, this is being understood as an historic day. Of course, assuming the vote does go through this evening, there will be immediate, urgent appeals to the Supreme Court to declare this firing illegal. And so, the cabinet vote may not be enforceable, but still, the Israeli government has chosen now officially and brazenly a route of complete lawlessness.
It's notable how many, I mean, you won't have been listening, but we've been talking about Donald Trump's administration for most of the morning, and it's extraordinary how many of the words you're using have popped up in this conversation that popped up prior, when we talk about the hollowing out of institutions, when we talk about contempt for the rule of law, when we talk about trying to create an untrammeled executive, an executive unguarded, really, unopposed by traditional institutions that protect the people from authoritarianism and even from dictatorship. Can he be stopped, Noga?
Well, there are two people who could stop him, are the two who he's trying to fire this weekend. The Shin Bet, the Israeli version of MI5, is statutorily charged with protecting the institutions of the Israeli democratic regime. So the head of the Shin Bet is one of the people who could say the prime minister now presents a clear and present danger to the state, to the institutions of the state. The other one is the attorney general, who also could write a letter establishing the basis for Netanyahu to be declared unfit to serve because he no longer believes in the rule of law.
Right.
It's not a coincidence that these are the last gatekeepers standing in Israel, and it's not a coincidence that he's trying to get them both fired this weekend. In fact, the very extremist minister you just mentioned, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who Netanyahu appointed to be head of domestic security in Israel, despite the fact that he is a man who's been convicted 13 times of hate crimes and terror. He's a guy whose entire career before entering politics was as a thug and as a threat to society. He quit the parliament on January 19th to protest the ceasefire. And yesterday, with the resurgence of war, he returned to the government. Now, this is also an important point. Not his return, but the fact that that too is illegal. He is under investigation for abusing his power as the minister in charge of police. And as someone under criminal investigation, he cannot legally be appointed minister. Again, yesterday, the Attorney General made it clear in writing to the Prime Minister that he does not have the right to appoint this man as the Minister in charge of domestic security. Netanyahu and his cabinet went ahead with it nonetheless, and they're just making it completely clear that the rule of law at least does not apply to them.
Crikey. Thank you for covering so much ground in a relatively short amount of time. I'd ask you finally and briefly, did you ever think you would see events like this in Israel?
Never. All throughout 2023, before the Hamas attack, it was clear that Netanyahu was attempting to take a power grab. And I have Latin American origins. I know what power grabs look like, and it was clear to me what he was trying. But the institutions of the State of Israel still were able to mount a defense against his efforts at that time. And that now seems to be crumbling.
Well, we should continue, with your help, Noga Tarnopolski, to keep a close eye on proceedings. Noga talking to us live there from Jerusalem. And if you've been wondering, or if you are wondering, even in the course of that conversation, why media outlets, individuals and organs, stations, newspapers, who have been absolutely unquestioning in their dedication to supporting Israel's actions in Gaza, to supporting Netanyahu, if you're wondering why they've gone all a bit quiet, the kind of people who described the protests against the killings in Gaza as being pro-Hamas or anti-Semitic. I think you now know why they've all gone a bit quiet, because Netanyahu became indefensible some time ago. Of course, it's unlikely that the people who also brought you Brexit, Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, austerity, Liz Truss, it's unlikely they'll be apologising anytime soon for having got this so horribly wrong as well. But on we go. It's 2 minutes after 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Minutes after 11 is the time. It took years, didn't it, for Brexit supporters to start insisting that we stop talking about Brexit. I think Farage even did it on Question Time, didn't he? When Alistair Campbell was trying to get him to take some sort of responsibility for what actually happened, he was, move on, stop it, stop talking. And I've heard people on the radio say, we've got to stop talking, people who told you to vote for it. We've got to stop talking about it. I always draw parallels with 1966. Imagine if by 1967 everyone was saying, shut up, stop mentioning the football. How dare you mention it's the strangest victory ever. It's taken 2 weeks with Trump. So here's a message I got from somebody who I think is sort of waving a little flag from Idiot's Corner. Why is a UK radio host on a UK radio station more concerned about what is happening in the States than what is happening in the UK? Another murder in London. And it was on the 5th of March, because I've discovered recently that I can see all the messages sent in by somebody when I get one sent in today. It was on the 5th of March that this same clown sent in, America is back, James, and you can't do anything about it. So what is that? I mean, from the 5th to the 20th, that's almost 2 weeks to the day, isn't it? That's 15 days. It's taken 15 days for this character to go, yay, to go, please stop talking about America. Stop it. That thing I thought was going to, it's an extraordinary achievement. And of course it keeps Idiot's Corner ticking over as well. So thank you on all accounts. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. Turn our attention next to a story I struggle with. I've got to be honest with you. And don't let me forget, I've got missed information for you this hour as well. A story I struggle with regards to GCSEs. It was around yesterday, but we didn't have time to cover it. And oddly, Dan got in touch with me on WhatsApp when I bigged him up yesterday, because Dan rang in on Monday, I think. Was it Monday or Tuesday? To say, when we were talking about young people not in employment, education or training, to say that the emphasis on academia is far too high. The pressure to get GCSEs, the pressure to do GCSEs is far too high. And I don't think, display this when I was talking to Dan. because he was so persuasive and he was speaking from personal experience. But my gut reaction to that is often to resist. And I've always thought that was quite a noble position to hold. The idea that when children are told they are not academic, they are being done a disservice. Do you understand where I'm coming from? I still kind of feel that. So I'm in a space of cognitive dissonance on this, because Dan knew that his son shouldn't have been doing a Spanish GCSE and would have been a lot better served doing something that might lead to a job with his hands. It was Dan in Bromley on Tuesday. Thank you, Elliot. Great work. And yet I have this. Is it almost patronising? Do you think response that is? He just hasn't had the right teachers. The life of the mind is something everybody can enjoy and indulge, and you shouldn't be consigning kids at 14, 15 to a non-academic future. But that sounds increasingly hollow, doesn't it? I think it comes partly from all the calls that I've taken over the years from people who failed the 11 plus. One of the great perennials of lazy radio phone-ins used to be, let's bring back grammar schools. And then people who'd benefited, the tiny percentage of pupils who'd benefited from going to grammar school would ring in to talk about how brilliant it was. And as is often the way with right-wing politics, we'd forget completely about the massive percentage of people who had been, in some sense, written off at the age of 11. Those were the stories I took. Those were the calls I got, the people telling me what it was like to essentially be sent into the second class at the age of 11. And the pressure that some kids still are, of course, in parts of the country where grammar schools still exist, survive. And that's where it comes from. That's where my gut resistance to the idea that pupils should sit fewer GCSE exams under plans to be recommended in a curriculum review. So the interim report was published on Tuesday, and it seems that SATs and other primary school assessments would survive. They're not popular, I can tell you, with parents and with teachers, but that the reliance or the weight currently placed on GCSEs would shift. And it's as if Dan in Bromley had actually been involved in the review. I've checked and he wasn't, because they're also looking at increasing a focus on applied knowledge and skills, looking at finance, looking at budgeting, looking at employment, looking at interview skills, looking at problem-solving projects and public speaking, and stepping back, if you like, from more traditional and very heavily measured academic subjects. So it would become a more knowledge-rich curriculum with a much more diverse array of knowledge. This because the system, in a nutshell, was, quotes, not working for all, particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds and those with special educational needs. And that's where my old thing kicks in. That's where my old impulse kicks in, because I'm thinking, if you're from a less privileged background, that doesn't mean you're less intelligent. And therefore, with the right help and support, you could be enjoying the life of the mind, the more intellectual pursuits, every bit as much as somebody from a middle-class background or someone from a better-off background. So how do we work our way into this together, especially in a way that needs to sound different from Tuesday's show? I guess I want you to persuade me. I want you to persuade me that encouraging teenagers away from traditional academic subjects and into other areas, which include let us add to the list more vocational skills, possibly more manual skills. Why can't a kid at 14 do a plumbing course alongside other subjects? It's not as if he's necessarily going to be who is ever going to regret having been taught plumbing? I've got a thermostat on my shower that's gone a bit doolally, and I can't even, I thought my Allen key, I can't even get the bit off to get into it to change the anyway, I digress. But who would ever regret being taught some plumbers perhaps would be a little bit cross if everyone got taught some plumbing. It'd be a bit like teaching radio hosting in secondary school. You've got to be careful. Be careful what you wish for. But apart from plumbers, who currently get called out for some jobs that are pretty straightforward, I bet YouTube's taken a chunk out of plumbers' income as well. There's a couple of jobs you can do yourself. I bought some drain rods last year. Did I tell you about that? Probably best if I don't. But they work. Who's ever going to regret learning plumbing at school? So you could even stick that on the list. But I've got this weird, and it's possibly because of my own education. It's possibly because mum and dad didn't go to university. They didn't even go into the sixth form. The weight that was placed on education for me and my sister growing up was absolutely enormous. It was the path out of some straitjackets that I think my dad found himself in professionally. You can imagine what it was like on the Daily Telegraph if you had a Leeds accent in a world where people who made Jacob Rees-Mogg sound like Grant Mitchell were in charge. So just that kind of emphasis on education, and also the joy I take in literature, particularly in theatre, drama, poetry. I showed you a bit in the last hour. I was waxing lyrical. Yeah, I love it. I'll say it again. If you've got a kid who loves football but thinks they don't like theatre, take them to see Dear England. It's at the National Theatre now, then it's at the Lowry Theatre in Salford, and then it's going on a national tour. So there's no excuse. In fact, if you're a teacher, take the whole class. It's absolutely brilliant. I digress slightly. So I've got this sense that by redirecting children or by directing children away from academic subjects, we let them down. And I'm still not 100% sure that I'm wrong. What do you think? 0345 6060973. Can't really argue. Martin Lewis is brilliantly strong on this as well. There's quite a couple of full disclosure guests for you there. James Graham, who wrote Dear England, and Martin Lewis, both been on Full Disclosure. But he's always talking about how important it is to teach children finance and budgeting. You can't really argue with that. But to take them away from subjects like modern languages, to do less academic study, I think I'm suffering from my deitis. I think I'm suffering from that condition that I often condemn other people for suffering from, when I can't quite accept that what I did generationally is not the best practice. It's a weird one, isn't it? But you get a lot of it. People who just can't, well, I can't believe it. Well, in my day we didn't do this, we didn't know. But in your day, people died of scurvy and rickets, depending on how old you are. Of course we're going to do things differently. So I can't quite buy, because of a combination of my education and my family background, I can't quite reach the place that my logic tells me I should be in. So logic tells me it's bloody ridiculous to force all kids down academic routes when they're not suited for them. My heart, and I hope it's my heart and not some curious combination of condescension and patronising, my heart tells me that's not fair. And the other thing that's changed, of course, is that the job opportunities available to people who know how to wire a plug or install a toilet are probably better now than they are for people whose degree equips them for a career in God knows what David Graeber would have called a BS job. So how do you do it? How do you persuade someone? Because I tell you what, I remember interviewing Joe Johnson, the nice one, who was a universities minister at the time. It was on Newsnight, it wasn't here. And he was bringing in a kind of universities light option. It was like a slightly watered down version of university. And I said to him, would you want your own children to go to this sort of institution? And it was one of those little moments. It went about as viral as Newsnight clips can go, because it was clear from his face that the thought had never actually occurred to him, poor fella. And looking back, I wonder if that was really the zinger that I thought it was at the time, because he knows his children, I don't, and he'll know what their intellectual capabilities are, so he'll know whether or not they would be suitable for a course that was designed to address or to propel children who were not massively academic, who were not super bright in scholastic terms. So in some ways it might have been a stupid question, but it speaks to the problem I've got. It speaks to the dilemma I'm trying to describe, which is telling other people's children that they should be trained in a less academic way, while quietly acknowledging that it won't be your kids doing plumbing Do you see what I mean? So what do you reckon? Does our system currently let down children by putting too much emphasis on traditional academic subjects? All right? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I want proof. Teachers, parents, former pupils. We are all former pupils. The only people who are not former pupils are people who are current pupils, and they will soon be former pupils. So is the system actually skewed? And are we all suffering from a little bit of my dayitis? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And I nearly said, if you can tell me how to fix a thermostat on my shower, I'll give you a mystery hour round of applause early. But don't do that, because you'll clog up, it's an appropriate analogy, you'll clog up my switchboard. 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11. Tony, thank you for that message. I don't know if I'll be able to read it out without welling up. So it may just remain between you and me. But I want you to know that I've seen it, and it's highly possible I will read it out before Mystery Hour. But not just yet, because I want to get stuck straight into this. Imagine, if you would, 2 classrooms full of children of the same age, and let's say that they are children who have not excelled academically. They may even have been removed from the educational mainstream because of behavioural issues or issues of disruption. And in one classroom, they are reciting irregular Spanish verbs. Can you think of what? I can't think of an irregular Spanish verb, but you take my point. And in the other, they're being taught how to strip an engine. Which class do you think has the higher levels of engagement? Seriously. So why have I got a problem with the idea that sending children down the non-academic path is somehow doing them a disservice? Peter is in Margate. Lovely stuff. Peter, what would you like to say?
Well, I think that getting hold of young lads, especially young lads, which go off the rails when they're sort of 14 years old, become troubles in schools and that, there's a reason for that, and they're just not getting it academically.
Yes.
And I've been involved in helping those boys with mentoring them and even training them and taking them through to apprentice. The reason I'm in Margate is because I'm visiting a former success, a lad that got expelled 3 times in 4 weeks from different schools.
Good Lord.
And the moment that he then became under my wing, if you like, for mentoring, and I started taking him to work on a Saturday and showing him some manual skills, he got very interested, and he became very successful in his own business in Margate. He's now given that up because of some back issues, and he's changed to being an immigration officer. But he's he's now on a salary of nearly £40,000 a year.
Yes, and he'd have been lost completely if it wasn't for the intervention of people like you.
He would have just become a thug.
Yeah. And what age do we make this call, do you think, Peter? That's part of my problem, I think, and it is my problem. I think it's a middle-class bias or a kind of a bookie bias. It's not for everybody. Just because it worked for me doesn't mean it works for everybody. When
we got rid of the tech colleges was when we started losing all of these boys.
Yeah, maybe.
When we got rid of the tech colleges, because you were streamed. And yes, there were some people that were wrongly streamed, people that were academically good but preferred doing the manual stuff, and you have that crossover. But at least people were coming out of school with a job.
What age would you do it?
14.
14 instead of 11?
Yeah.
I think that makes sense to me. And that, of course, involves roughly the same period as GCSE options. Maybe root and branch change is necessary here, undoing some of the stuff. Well, actually, one of the people that used to work in the education office was describing this as being a vindication of, I'll find it, of some of the stuff that Michael Gove did. He's a bright lad as well. I used to work with him. I'll find it for you shortly. But that idea that I can't quite shake, that by sending children down a less academic route, you're denying them choices later in life, needs to be addressed, I think. And people like Peter are addressing it perfectly. Rosie is in East Wittering. Delightful. Rosie, what would you like to say?
Well, I am dead against the national curriculum from the time it was introduced, because it seemed to me that it was going to make all children go down like a public school academic route, and they just weren't able to. If I have a little story, I've been a teacher all my life. I've taught in different schools, comprehensive, grammar, public school even.
Yes.
The last school I was at, once national curriculum came in, it was very academic. And whereas in the past, the lads who didn't fit in, one of the teachers, one of the leaders of their year, the teacher in charge of that year, would take them off for cycle rides round the downs and sort of educate them that way, which doesn't academic at all.
No.
I'd have them sitting at the back of the class, right? Now, teachers don't get perks. There are no perks in teaching, I'll tell you that one.
What about the apples?
And I'll give you half pencils.
Don't say the holidays, Keith, whatever you do.
No, half pencils.
Half pencils, all right, carry on. Might as well be a bookie.
Go round the back of the class where these lads have been, they've been good.
Yeah.
Right, not always, but they'd been sort of not making trouble. And I would pick up lots of broken pencils. And the poor kids had been sitting there with their big muscles and all their energy, in frustration, breaking those pencils in two.
So they wanted to be doing manual stuff, and you had to teach them history. To teach them history.
They're adolescents. No, they can teach history you can teach them history as well, but not to the extent that the national curriculum imposed so much useless stuff, which you couldn't teach. I hope it's improved, because I was there right from the beginning. And I can also tell you it even affected the primary schools, that the primary school children, when they used to come up to secondary school...
But how do you sift... Sorry, I've talked over you there, Rosie. Carry on.
Yeah, well, I was in it... Well, it was a multi... we taught... what's it called? Non-streamed.
Yeah.
So every class had from you might call the dyslexic children and the ones who found it difficult and needed special needs to the very bright children, and they were all in the same class, and we taught them like that. There's a word for it, and because I'm old, I've forgotten the term.
Well, you come to the wrong place. You were expecting me to bail you out. When would we stream them though? When would we make the decision? I don't know why I just got an image in my head of sheep shearing. When do we send them to the left gate or the right gate?
It depends what exams they get, what level exam they took.
Yeah, but that's chicken and egg, isn't it? Because they might not. They might have done better in their exams if they'd been taught better in an academic sense.
You can't blame the teachers. I'm
not blaming anyone. I'm just saying when would we do it and how would we know? As 2 14-year-olds, one of them might be like,
when the national curriculum came in, there was too much too soon, and you weren't allowed to. I mean, we used to teach thematically. I taught in the humanities department, and we didn't have separate subjects for geography and history.
Oh,
and
okay.
RE.
Yeah, I get. Well, that's exam driven, isn't it? So you get 3 GCSEs out of it, whereas in fact it may have made more sense to continue doing it thematically as you described. Rosie, thank you. I'm cracking on only so that I can squeeze in a quick missed information before the next round of news headlines.
Missed information.
Thank you, Emily. So here's a headline from today's Daily Mail. Elliot's eagle eyes spotted this one. I didn't get it myself. Elliot is in for Eleanor at the moment. More than half of adults I'm only allowed to work with producers whose names begin with L's. More than half of adults rely on state for livelihood. So what is that headline designed to make you think? Yeah, exactly. That headline is designed to make you think that more than half of adults are having a laugh. More than half of adults are taking the mickey. More than half of adults are swinging the lead. More than half of adults are signing on, claiming the rock and roll. Feckless work shall I lay about, spending all their money on flat screen televisions and Benson and Hedges. More than half of adults. Okay, should we break it down? I mean, they do in the article, but we live in a world where... they don't do all of it in the article, actually, but they do some of it. But we live in a world where most people don't read past the headline, and that is what the headline is designed to do, make you angry. More than half of adults reliant on state for livelihood. So let's start. 25% of them are pensioners. Straight away. So scratch them immediately. Well, how dare they be Oh, no, hang on. I'm in favour of pensioners. Why have they written the headline that way? 11% are employed by the public sector. So they might be police officers or soldiers. So down with that sort of thing. What do we want? Fewer police officers and soldiers? Yeah, all right, Daily Mail, well played. So that's 25% pensioners, 11% public sector, 5% are students with loans. So, I mean, that's a bit like saying everyone with a house is dependent on banks for their livelihood. So that's 5% who are students with loans. They include 0.3% of the population because they work in HR and planning. And apparently, if we didn't have laws and regulations and things like health and safety and employment law, then we wouldn't need HR and planning. So that's all being reliant on the state as well. I don't quite understand the logic there, but it's 160,000 adults. 12% are on universal credit. So at least they're unemployed, except they're not, are they? Because 38% of people on universal credit are actually in work. So a headline that is designed, and there are no prizes for guessing where this headline has come from. Altogether now, Tufton Street. In this case, the Adam Smith Institute, which might not technically be on Tufton Street, but it's very much part of that ludicrous coterie of opaquely funded organisations that manage to insert their, quotes, research, end quotes, into newspapers and secure incredibly misleading headlines like this, despite not revealing who funds them. There's a whole chapter on characters involved in how they broke Britain. So more than half of adults reliant on state for livelihood. Whatever you do, don't mention that it includes pensioners, soldiers, police officers, students, people working in health and safety, people working in human resources, people with jobs who don't get paid enough to break even or to get by, so they have to claim universal credit, and everyone else in the public sector as well. And that is a really good example of how hard newspapers and so-called think tanks work to make you believe things that are not true. Thank the Lord for
Missed information.
It's 11:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34 is the time. Just thinking about what Noga Tarnopolski told us about Benjamin Netanyahu's brazen assault on the rule of law, on the legal institutions, and reading a bit more about President Trump calling for the impeachment of the federal judge who ordered a halt to his efforts to remove Venezuelans from the country using war powers that haven't been invoked for decades. And remember that these are deportations that have been justified on the grounds that if the people being deported haven't got any criminal record, then that's just because they're so good at being criminals that we've never caught them. Joseph Heller turning in his grave. Or perhaps, I don't know, blowing his pen nib and going, yeah, well, it wasn't actually a satire exclusively, it was also a warning. A bit like what Margaret Atwood says about The Handmaid's Tale. But anyway, we're in slightly different territory, except for the fact that those little references there are a consequence in part of my education, and they provide a richness to my thinking that I value and cherish. The fact I can drop a bit of Margaret Atwood or a bit of Joseph Heller into the conversation when trying to understand complicated modern developments is hugely beneficial. So I don't know that it is a middle-class bias to wonder whether it's right to push children away from that kind of education at quite an early age because they haven't demonstrated an affinity for it. Scott makes a superb point on Blue Sky. I'm sure no one from your alma mater, no matter how thick they were, would be choosing technical classes. I only took one A-level, and that was drama. Also a technical, non-academic course. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you couldn't not do academic A-levels at my school, and my school was largely non-streamed. I mean, there was an entrance exam to get in, but if you attended one of the feeder schools, one of the two feeder schools for my boarding school, my public school, you didn't have to pass any test to get in. So some of the lads that you rubbed along with were academically pretty poor. And yet they ended up getting good A-levels. And that's where I'm coming from. So if everyone could have an education like mine, I don't know, though. Would we say that no one would go down the technical route? No one would go down the manual route? It's a really strange one. But that, oddly, Scott, makes me feel a little bit better about my inbuilt bias. Because I'm thinking of the lads who were C or D stream at my school and went on to be, one of them's a GP. I don't know how much confidence that instills with you, but by the time he was sitting in his A-levels, he was no longer someone that you would have described as having missed the boat a bit academically because he had brilliant, dedicated teaching. Would he have been happier going down a technical route at 14? I don't know. Maybe if we called plumbing physics, it would sound a little bit different, because it is, a lot of it, of course. I don't know. And I must stop saying I don't know. Michael's in Brentwood. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I don't disagree with you from a personal point of view. I like the academic side of school,
right.
But I have 3 children. My 2 eldest, my son and my daughter, are completely different. My son passed 11 plus, my daughter failed. My son hated school.
Oh.
Hated it, just didn't enjoy it. He never felt very bright. He always struggled. My daughter sailed through. She loved everything, and music and drama and all the extras. He was great at sport, was no good at school.
Okay.
But when he left school at 16, he said, I'm not going to college. So we made a deal with him. If he didn't go, he had to get a job. He came back within a few days, became a bricklayer's apprentice, and he's never looked back. He came into his own. He 75 times table, all the things you need as a bricklayer, all the things you need to be able to work out. He's using maths and fractions and angles all the time.
Why do you? Why? Oh, right, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll go there. All right. This is like you just held a dartboard up in front of me, didn't you? Why do you need your 75 times table to be a bricklayer?
Because a brick is apparently 75 millimetres long or wide or something. I don't know, but you have to have it.
You can't just drop stuff like that into the middle of a conversation and not back it up with. But no, I take your point. And so he did have the brain.
Oh, absolutely had the brains, but he just didn't enjoy whether it was what they were teaching, how they were teaching it. He wasn't a big reader. I love books. There's books all over the house. My daughter's got so many books you wouldn't believe. He used a book for opening his door or keeping his door open. That was it. He just wasn't that kind of boy. He's clever, and when he came into work and he realised he knew stuff other people didn't know, he was quicker at doing things they didn't do. You know, he's done incredibly well, and he earns really good money.
I'm sure he does. Loads of money, actually.
Yeah, but at school he felt like a failure. He felt like he didn't know anything.
Oh, man, this is such a tricky one, isn't it? Because, you know, I've got this theory that if he'd gone to my school, then he'd have been all right. He'd have ended up doing A-levels and doing quite well in them. Hardly anybody did badly in A-levels at my school.
It's hard to say no to that, but his school was excellent. My daughter left with 11 and then ended up getting 4 A-levels. She ended up with a degree, an English literature and language degree. So the teaching at the school wasn't...
How do we know? How do we know? Well, you know, do you see what I mean? What we're going to say 14, which is obviously fairer than 11, and there'll still be some mistakes. Yep. But how do we know?
Well, first off, you don't have to force people out. It might be a case of, are they enjoying it? Because if you're not enjoying it, if you don't enjoy reading, you're not going to read.
Yeah, but you are if you get the right book. You know, I believe that. I've done whole shows about it.
And I do. I do as well. But you can't imagine that I haven't tried really hard with my son.
Of course,
you do a documentary on the First World War.
Yeah.
Or even he reads about the First World War and the terrible trench warfare and the politics, and he's really into that now. But at 14, all he wanted to do was his judo, his rugby, whatever it was he was doing outside of school. You couldn't have made him read if you stood over him with a stick.
That's a really good point you make about it's not actually a life sentence. It's just what's right then and there. You're a good dad as well, so you understood this from quite early doors, that there would be no point trying to force him into a mould that he didn't fit in.
My wife helped me understand it.
Well, I think we should both get that on our gravestones, Michael.
Yes.
Thank you. That's lovely. That's really nice and a lovely corrective to some of the stuff that I've been saying. It's the brick plus the mortar bed that equals 75 millimetres, Graham tells us. In fact, it's extraordinary how many people listening to this are qualified to answer that question. A brick is 75 millimetres deep, and brickwork is worked out by courses, which is a layer of bricks. Being a brickie, 75 millimetres is the gauge for the course of bricks. There you go. There are a lot of brickies, or at least a lot of people who are qualified to lay bricks, listening to this programme, as you would expect. I'll tell you what, you wait ages for one Michael to come along, and then two come along at once. Michael is in Macclesfield. Michael, what would you like to say?
Yeah, it probably follows closely as what Graham's just said then, as students and pupils made to feel stupid. So I think there is a difference between, there are different spectrums in terms of whether you're academic, academic and intelligence are two different things. And I think the danger in school is that they're almost treated the same. And I think where I lived in it, I think schools tend to push students down paths depending on the area that those schools are in. Yeah. My school just, they were pushing.
It's a very, very clicky phone line, so I'm not going to be able to stay with you for much longer. It's not your fault. It's just driving me nuts. I mean, league tables and priorities and geography and postcode lotteries, all of those things, but none of that addresses this slightly odd thing I've now got stuck in the back of my mind about the fact that at my school, which was a fee-paying, relatively high-performing, but not particularly streamed boarding school, I can't think of anybody that really fluffed up their A-levels. And that is from a starting point in the first year when we were 13, when there were 5 streams. It went from A to E. And the E stream lads did well in their A-levels. So if they'd been sent down a non-academic... I don't know. I must stop saying I don't know. Michael, I'm sorry that I couldn't talk to you for longer, but those clicks were driving me potty. John's in Chiswick. Josh is in Chiswick. What would you like to say?
Hi, just to slightly echo what Michael said. I mean,
Which Michael? The first one or the second one?
The Michael the latter.
Okay, carry on. Michael the second.
Just to say, there are different types of intelligence. I mean, yes. I'm dyslexic, but I am actually quite academic, and I went on to get a politics and philosophy degree, which is quite a text-heavy, quite academic degree. I still can't consistently spell philosophy even to this day, but the point I'm trying to make is I think it's different for each child.
Yes.
Right? And there's different ways of learning. I have friends who I went to school with, like you, I went to a fee-paying school for my GCSE.
Yeah.
I have friends who I went to school with who are incredibly bright, incredibly well-read, but were not academic at school. And they're made to feel... and I think now, especially sort of the Tory emphasis on STEM and the EBAC and stuff over the past sort of 10, 15 years, people are forced into a route where you feel like university is the only option to be successful and there's sort of like a badge of honour of intelligence, when that it's not true. And I think you alienate a lot of children in doing that. And I think now everyone's meant to stay at school till 18. So...
so when would we do it then? When would we start the sifting? 14.
It's difficult to say.
Because show me a 14-year-old and then send them to a one of the top fee-paying schools in the country, and he'll probably get 3 A's at A-level.
Yes, but that.
What does that mean? Why is that relevant to this conversation? I can't quite unpack it.
Well, the thing is I mean, my folks that went against their principles and sent me to a fee-paying school because they knew I was dyslexic, and I very much benefited from the smaller class sizes. But the thing is you're right. But then also I know the kids who went to public schools who didn't do very well.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. So
okay.
So it's not.
Maybe I'm too old. I'm too old to remember. That's probably. And also they expelled me, so I wasn't even there when all the A-level results came in. Maybe some of those lads did appallingly.
But I think the thing is it depends on the child, and I think at GCSEs as well. I mean, sure, if you're an engineer, you need to know circular geometry, probably. I've never had to use that in my life whatsoever. However, percentages I use all the time.
Yeah, and also I used to do this with one of mine. I'd talk about training your brain. You're never actually going to need to lift weights in your job, but you do it to build up your muscles. You're never going to have to do trigonometry, but you do it to build up your brain muscles. It was quite a compelling argument. Worked a bit, but not completely. Thank you, Josh. Great stuff. 11:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. I just got a message from a lad that I went to school with 40 years ago. 35, I suppose, from when I left. He says, I thought you were indefinitely suspended as opposed to expelled. Was I? Oh, someone tell my mum. Honestly, she'll be over the moon. Anyway, I never went back, so I think it's moot. And the last word on this, because we will return to it. This is from Jago. Your question has an inbuilt assumption that academic is better than manual. I.e., if you are able to do A-levels, you must, regardless of your interests, and that you only go down the manual route if you are unable to do A-levels. You're right, and that I think you've nailed my problem there. And they add, we just need to listen to children. Up to a point. And final word on this to Emma. It might be an outrageous idea, but why are we not bringing up polymaths who can persuade, plumb, and poetically declaim? Well, I got 2 out of 3. And I did unblock a drain the other day, but I'm damned if I can work out how to fix the thermostat on my shower. All of which is a perfect introduction to LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, who has been doing something that I think more political journalists should do, and that is talking to Ed Davey.
Journalism.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
It was lovely to speak to Ed Davey, who is still the leader of one of Britain's most biggest political parties yesterday, and he was trying to talk about the spring statement. He wants an emergency budget to come forward rather than this spring statement that we're expecting from Rachel Reeves yesterday. But yeah, I wanted to ask him about a range of things. Of course, we talked to him yesterday a little bit about the government's welfare reforms. He feels that carers like him are going to be quite worried about what the changes to PIP are going to look like as well. But also, I was keen to ask him about Israel, and we've discussed this a little bit on the show this week. Downing Street furiously, I think it's fair to say, slapped down David Lammy earlier this week about his claims about Israel breaking international law by blocking aid to Gaza.
I mean, Noga Tarnopolski was with us live from Jerusalem earlier, describing how Benjamin Netanyahu is breaking domestic law with relative impunity as well, but exactly. Downing Street remaining very much on the wait and see pie page.
Yeah, and as Keir Starmer's so focused on one war, the Ukraine conflict, it just does feel that as the discussion around that is sort of hoping to go towards a ceasefire, towards peace, Gaza and Israel is heating right back up again, and we've been seeing some quite shocking scenes from there in the last few days. I was keen to see what Ed Davey, and obviously he's mentioned this at Prime Minister's Questions, we've talked about this quite a lot, he is regularly pressing the Prime Minister on doing more on Israel and Gaza and doing more on the conflict, keeping that pressure up on Israel. So yes, David Lammy told the Commons on Monday the country had definitely broken international law. Downing Street then said he was wrong to have said that. The government's definition of breaking international law at the moment has not changed. I asked Ed Davey what his thoughts were.
Well, I think the blockade on food into Gaza is outrageous. It should stop. There are so many people, hundreds of thousands of children and nearly 2 million people who are going without basic food and basic water. And I think Israel needs to change that. Whether it's a breach of international law, the lawyers can argue, but we all
But you
know.
don't think it is?
I genuinely don't know. It looks like it may well be. But whatever it is, whatever the legal situation, this blockade should end. The food should flow to the people of Gaza.
So I'm saying it looks like it may well be a breach of international law. Now, from the people I was speaking to in the Foreign Office sort of this week about this, it does feel like David Lammy may have just overstepped a little. But, I don't quite understand really what the difference is between a government's legal position of we have broken international law and the Foreign Secretary saying, I think they have broken international law. It seems quite a step. But yes, he'll continue to clearly put the pressure on Keir Starmer there.
It's a bit like the use of the word genocide. Many people think that it has now become appropriate, but other people think that you can't, especially if you're a professional broadcaster or indeed a politician, you have to wait for the verdict to be reached by the international court before you can actually offer it up as a de facto a thing that has happened.
Yeah, and he did say, look, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the answer to this question. It should be up to a lawyer to make that call and not for the government to make that call. But obviously the government have lawyers in their own departments who should be making that day in, day out. And of course, there was a moment for this British government that when the Labour government came in, when they decided to suspend those arms exports to Israel. And yesterday, the Prime Minister's spokesperson refused to rule out doing so with more arms exports licences. So that could be something that we could have in the back pocket. We know at the time that really upset the Netanyahu government to have what was considered an ally put that pressure on. So I'm sure we'll be hearing a little bit more from Ed Davey on that at some point.
And speaking of arms, this 150 billion euros that is going to be spent by the European Union on British arms currently excludes British manufacturers on the grounds that we're not members of the European Union. Well done, everybody. And another area in which Ed Davey possibly can distinguish himself from both of the other major leaders, from Badenoch and from Starmer, is when it comes to Europe, when it comes to what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pardon? What happened then? Keith, what are you doing? You're mixing it up.
Come on,
Was that a jungle mix? Yeah, nice one. Carry on.
Yes, Europe is something that I think a lot of people, especially on the left of British politics, want to see a political party that is going to fight to go back into the European Union. At the moment, no political party, I don't think, is actually saying, including the Liberal Democrats, and obviously they have been talking about a customs union, they've been talking about how they want to see Keir Starmer do more on this issue, but they do feel that this is something that Keir Starmer especially is something that he can do more on. And obviously with Ed Davey, he is in this position right now where, of course, he's not doing particularly well in the polls, which I did tell him yesterday.
How did he respond to that?
He just said, he sort of said, do you think Reform have taken your position as the third party in British politics? And he said, well, the results speak for themselves. I got 72 MPs and they got 5, and I'm quite happy with that.
Down to 4.
Now 4.
Including the woman.
We're not going to do this again, are we?
Yeah, we have to. People need to be reminded of what happens when you vote for that party. You get woman beaters in Parliament.
Completely fair. But I think for many people, they will be looking to Ed Davey. So what happens in a situation, I know we're a bit far off for political predictions in 4 years' time.
Is it still down? So I don't know if this has happened to you before since you became our political editor. Burley's down. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Do you? I don't.
I had to talk to Nick for about 8 minutes.
Did you?
One time, yeah.
Good
we couldn't
Lord.
get through. I know, it's a long time.
You got a bonus. So we can't play the clips?
We can't play the clips.
No.
Okay, well, I just have to tell you what Ed Davey said then instead. I asked him about 2 things. Would you be the first political leader of a political party to say that we should be going back into the European Union? He would not answer that question. He is not prepared to say that. Even now, he says, we need a customs union with the EU. We need to work closer. But more interestingly, I asked him, well, say in 4 years' time, we are in a position where the Labour Party haven't won an all-out majority. Your party is probably the most politically aligned to the Labour Party in the British Parliament right now. What would you be looking for from Keir Starmer in the potential that you could do some kind of deal? And he said, look, I'm not interested in that right now. I don't want to talk about that right now. I'm focused on Liberal Democrats making more gains, and they hope that they will do so. But the answer to his second question, where I said, what do you think Labour should be doing more of? Yeah. What do you think they should be doing better? And he said, Europe. So I think that could now...
Very close to
very close to saying if...
Conditions of coalition?
Exactly.
Or one of those... How fascinating. I only wish I could have listened to it.
Yeah.
But of course, your second-hand relaying of what happened is the second best thing available. I need to, on your behalf, I'm just going to insulate you from attacks. Not attacks, from valid critiques from SNP supporters, because, of course, they are promoting rejoining the European Union, and they are a political
that's
party.
Fair, and that's fair enough to make a UK-wide political party.
So if we can play one clip, the second one or the third one?
The second one. Sorry, the third one, the final clip, please.
Let's have a listen.
I have to say I'm not focused on that at all. My job is to make sure we are the best opposition in Parliament. The Conservatives are a failed opposition. They cause a lot of the economic crisis. They cause a mess in the NHS. They cause a mess in the immigration system. They're just not credible. But our country needs an opposition. This government is disappointing, whether it's on winter fuel payments, on the family farm tax, on the national insurance, or failing to stand up to Trump. And our country needs an opposition party that will take on the government. And Liberal Democrats are the only party doing that. And I'm proud that we are a strong opposition.
Do you think there are some issues you think the Labour Party should be taking a bit more seriously?
Well, Europe, for example. We need to rebuild our relationship with Europe, so badly damaged by the Conservatives. And the Conservatives' trade deal with Europe was a total disaster. It's hit our trade, it's hit our growth, it's hit public finances. I think Labour's being way too timid on that. And you could look at what's happening with Donald Trump. You could look at what's happening with sewage and the water industry. That Labour's just pulling its punches, and that's not right. We need to sort these problems out. The Conservatives left them. People wanted a new government to bring change, and so far we haven't seen that.
Were you interviewing him in the changing room of a municipal leisure centre?
I wish. No, I was not. Yeah, sorry, that's totally my bad. I'm not. I had a nicer quality one as well.
Different? Oh, could you?
And I did.
We all make mistakes, as JLC has pointed out. Everyone makes mistakes, Keith. I still respect and appreciate. There you go, Keith. That one's for you. Did a nice little bit of echo there, wasn't there? Great stuff, and bringing it in just in time for Mystery Hour.
Yes, and I will be reminding Ed Davey of that in 4 years' time. If we do get to a point where he is playing kingmaker in some sort of coalition, does he think that the Labour Party have done enough on Europe to potentially get back in with a potential deal? Really interesting.
A Lib-Lab pact.
Yeah.
Just in conclusion, before we head to the shallow end and launch Mystery
Hour,
this isn't for you necessarily. We were just talking earlier about Jimmy Carter putting his peanut farm into a blind trust, and how that speaks of a different age of presidential conduct, because he was worried that he could stand accused of having enacted legislation that was favourable to peanut farmers, and to avoid that he put it into a blind trust. It's been reported while we've been on air that Amazon paid $40 million for its Melania Trump documentary, of which $28 million goes directly into the First Lady's pocket. And we also know that Amazon has paid an undisclosed sum to air old episodes of The Apprentice, which is another way of sending both money and flattery to the president. Jeff Bezos, of course, the head of Amazon, was one of the tech billionaires standing behind Donald Trump at his inauguration. So I worry sometimes people think I exaggerate the scale of collapse and decline. But there's yet another $40 million illustration of it.
That's crazy.
Isn't it? The time now is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
James, I like that voice. I forgot to tell you. So this hasn't happened for ages. Right? We've only got 3 calls on the board at the moment. Normally we've got 10 by 5 to 12. In fact, I get a bit. I'm not going to tell you this. I shouldn't tell you this because it makes me sound unappreciative. I get a bit annoyed with people who start ringing in for mystery hour before I finish the 11 o'clock topic, because you never know, do you? You might get the best call of the hour just sneaking in at the final moment. But I forgot to big it up. So this is your best chance ever to get on. If you've tried and failed in the past to get through to mystery hour, then fill your boots. What is mystery hour? I hear a tiny number of people wonder. Well, it's your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. And the best thing about it is that absolutely everybody is welcome. And the number, you probably know it off by heart by now. I know children who can recite it. Their parents send me little clips of their children sitting in the back of the car going 03456060973 LBC. Once happened to me in a supermarket queue. A very pleasant experience. So you ring in with a question. There you go. I've spoiled it now. You won't get through. But be patient. Redial. Judicious use of redial. You ring in with a question or a mystery, a conundrum or a riddle, whatever it is. Something that you know must have an answer, but you're damned if you know what that answer is. And then someone else will ring in with the answer. And somehow, between those 2 poles, the magic happens. I don't know why, but it is true. So much so that it even spawned its own board game. Available at mysteryhour.co.uk. Go and have a look at that. Absolutely beautiful. And, of course, if you are lucky, stroke clever, stroke funny enough to make my favourite contribution of the week, and the management's decision is final, then you can win one without having to pay. And I'll just send it to you. And it will drop through your letterbox, or someone will send it to you. Anyway, just I don't get involved in that sort of thing. It's a bit above my pay grade. And you can find the full terms and conditions for that competition, because it's a proper competition, at lbc.co.uk. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. Don't have any rules, really. Used to have a bit of a problem with motoring questions, but I think that has evolved a little bit now. Don't ring in with motoring questions, but if there's a bit of nuance. So some questions that actually looked like motoring questions perhaps turned out not to be motoring questions, and also I'm not as bossy as I used to be. So a bit like I didn't finish the no, I'm not. Shut up, Keith. So I'd like didn't finish the story about the Basically alarm, did I? Which was a little alarm, and it was a proper alarm, like a sort of wah wah wah, and we played it when ever anyone said the word basically on the programme, because this is back in my bossy days. I was trying to remove the word basically. I didn't like the word basically. I was trying to excise it from our shared vocabulary. And I had a lovely bloke, Johnny, came in to do Keith's job, and it was his first day on the job. He was a very young lad, very keen, bright as mustard, keen as mustard. And there it is. So it's quite loud, you see. It's not a little subtle. It's a really big deal to just stick that into the middle of a radio broadcast. And this is both an embarrassing story and one that I can only really laugh at now. But the producer at the time obviously really impressed upon Johnny how important the Basically alarm was. I think it was the producer's idea, actually, looking back, not mine. And he loved it. My goodness, he loved it. And he used to just have this little giggly, you sit there just giggling like a child every time it went off. Because as Keith just demonstrated, it's not subtle. He'd giggle away. So he really impressed upon Johnny how important it was to listen really carefully for the whole 3 hours in case anyone said the word basically, and then bang, hit the button, because it only works if it's instant, And what the producer failed to impress upon Johnny was that there would be some circumstances in which the Basically alarm was entirely inappropriate. And that's what happened. I forget the precise details, but it was one of those calls that I have the enormous privilege of taking sometimes, involving deep and harrowing personal testimony. And in the middle of it, one of those rare occasions where I'm doing my absolute damnedest to stay silent and just give this person the space and the time that they need to share their extraordinary story. The caller used the word basically, and Johnny hit the bloody button. I mean, someone talking about death or something really, really hardcore, and he hit the button, and I just had to absolutely behave as if it hadn't happened at all. So that whopping great foghorn goes off in the background in the middle of we didn't have clips in those days, did we? We didn't put the whole show up on YouTube. It's just as well. And so that's why we didn't do that anymore. That's why we got rid of that one. It is 9 minutes after 12. Mystery Hour is about to get underway. A quick nod to Stephen, who says, when I first started listening to you, you were shouting at people and not pronouncing H properly. You were really annoying. Yeah, but there was something there, Stephen, wasn't there? There must have been something there, mate, because you're still here. Or rather, you're still here. Mystery Hour. Ollie's in Birmingham. Ollie, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Ollie.
James, my question is about international dialing codes.
Oh, yes.
Like phone numbers, obviously, if you ring up an international number and you have to put the numbers in for particular countries. I want to know where they come from and who decides basically kind of what numbers people get. Like if Scotland was to become independent tomorrow.
You could have got that one, Keith, couldn't you? You could have been on your toes for that one. No, don't worry now. It's too late. But no, stop it. Turn it off. That's ridiculous. You could have been. Just for the first one, Keith, after the story. I mean, come on. Anyway, sorry. So if Scotland was independent and it needed its own dialing code tomorrow, who decides what it is? And how?
Yeah.
But who?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're on. I like that. What's ours? 4-4 for the UK from overseas?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you just saying yeah now? Got nothing else
Germany
to say.
is 4-9.
We'll get you.
Australia is 6-1, for example.
There you go. So who does it? Who decides? Because I'm not aware of any kind of international. I wouldn't be surprised if it all comes back to us in Blighty. Or the United States. Anyway, we'll find out. Ollie, lovely question. Who decides what the international dialing codes are? What was the last new country, I wonder? What was the last new question I should have rung in and asked? Neil's in Southgate. Neil, question or answer?
It's a question.
Carry on, Neil.
The question is, why, when you dip a rich tea biscuit in a very hot cup of tea, does it not soften as quickly as if you leave the tea for 5 minutes and then dip it?
Doesn't soften as quick. So the cooler tea softens it faster?
It does.
Why wouldn't it? Why is that surprising? Why is it anomalous? Because it's equally wet.
It's equally wet, and if anything, I would have thought the hot tea would have softened it quicker.
Yeah, I would too, because of steam and things.
Yeah, exactly.
You've conducted this experiment it's been peer reviewed. It's been peer reviewed.
I've conducted this experiment over years.
And you had a control in place.
And always wondered the same question.
Peer reviewed, proper control, laboratory conditions.
Well, the living room, yeah.
No, that'll do. Okay. Yeah. So, and is it specific to rich teas, or do you not favour any other biscuits?
Well, it can be. Well, even sort of owned brand biscuits tend to be called rich tea these days. So
I know, but have you tried it with a digestive or a custard cream?
I would never dip a digestive or a custard cream. Sorry. That's just wrong.
Heathens! 12:12 is the time. Why does a rich tea biscuit soften quicker in cooler tea and slower in hotter tea? I like that question. And who comes up with the international dialing codes? I think South Sudan was probably the most recently instituted country. And while we're speaking of countries, I did misspeak earlier. Can anyone remember how or why or where? The answer is, when I talked about an Atlantic alliance without the United States, because Canada is on the other side of the Atlantic, and they would very much be a part of any post-NATO, if you like, or Sine USA Atlantic alliance would very much involve Canada. So my apologies there. I just managed to rescue Natasha from upsetting the whole of Scotland, and I didn't manage to rescue myself from upsetting the whole of Canada. 12:13 is the time. Matt's in Stourbridge. Matt, question or answer?
Hey, James, it's a question, please.
Carry on, Matt.
Flies.
Yeah.
When the weather gets warmer,
like today,
they just seem to, like today, and that's what's prompted it. We've seen it again today and yesterday. They sort of circle in the middle of rooms. Tends to be under light fittings. I think that's just because light fittings tend to be in the middle of rooms, but they just circle. Why don't they land? I mean, they can't hover. I just can't think why they just expend energy and why it's only in the middle of the room. Why isn't it?
And you're
in the corners
you're
or
confident that it happens when the weather improves. I mean, because you don't really have flies.
Well, it's just more flies, isn't it?
Yeah,
exactly. Just more flies when the weather's
So they circle
warmer.
the light fitting in the middle of the room. Does it matter whether it's on or off?
No, doesn't matter. It's not just an our house thing. I've checked this in other people's.
Got a lot of scientists on the show today. You and the last fellow.
Yes,
you and Neil. Peer-reviewed, laboratory conditions and with controls, proper experimental controls. So the flies, it's not on. They're not mistaking the bulb for the sun or anything like that, like a moth might.
Nope.
No? Okay.
No,
You're on?
and you can get 1s, 2s, 3s. They just circle.
They just love it. They just love it. Okay, you're on.
Seemingly.
What is going on? What is going on? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. If you can answer any of those three questions: international dialing codes, rich tea, biscuits, and circling flies. All human and insect life is here.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:16. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And the questions on the board so far, well, you know what they are. I told you a minute ago. I just clarify one thing. Anthony used capital letters to tell me that insects do not mistake light bulbs for the sun. So he's obviously taking it very, very seriously. I do apologise. The artificial light just disrupts the insect's guidance system, so it looks like it's attracting them. It's not, and this applies equally to flies and moths, etc., etc. 12:17 is the time. Chris is in Whitney. Question or answer, Chris?
Hello, James. Just a question.
Yes.
It is, why do all microwave ovens have the doors hung on the left-hand side?
Because we're almost all right-handed.
Do you think that's what it is?
Yeah, and it's not like a fridge because of the catch on a microwave. The you can't, like, you know, on a fridge you can usually swap your door around.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I discovered that quite late in life. I didn't realise.
Right.
I didn't realise that was widely known. Mrs. O'Brien.
I used to be a carpenter years ago and stuff.
So you know you're doing a fitted kitchen. You can switch the but you wouldn't be able to do that with a microwave because of your safety interlock switches. You see.
Yeah.
So it's going to be one of those things that simply reflects the hugely disproportionate number of right-handed people.
Okay.
I'm taking a round of applause for that. Thank you, please. Thank you. I'm almost certainly going to get corrected a little bit later on the programme, but never mind the quality, feel the width. Thank you, Chris. Toff's in Northampton. Toff, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's a question, please.
Carry on, mate.
So it's a bit of a random question.
Well, they all are. Have you been listening? So just asking about microwave doors.
I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
Calling on my birthday to break my
happy birthday to. I'd love to play you a little bit of music, but Nick Abbott has copyrighted it, and I'm not allowed to.
So the question is, why do my sneezes smell of cinnamon?
Is that a tongue twister?
No, hopefully not.
Why do my sneezes smell of cinnamon? How do you know that your sneezes smell of cinnamon?
Well, my ex-wife would always complain that she could smell my sneezes because no matter where I was in the house. And one day I went to the doctors about something else random.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it to the doctors. And he just gave me a funny look.
Well, that's what I'm doing now, but it's on the radio, so you can't see it.
Yeah, and I've never got to the bottom of it. I've never Dr. Googled it.
No, I'm not sure you'd get an answer there. Can I posit something a little bit uncomfortable?
Go ahead.
Is it possible that, because you mentioned she's your ex-wife.
No, it's nothing to do with that.
With what?
With her being my ex-wife, of course.
Well, it might be. Because is it possible that relations had reached the point where every single thing you did got on her nerves?
No, relations were golden and they still continue to be very positive.
All right. So it's not that then. Has anyone else confirmed? Because
my oldest daughter has as well, but I don't sneeze that often.
Well, you can't. I mean, so your oldest daughter says, Dad, your sneezes smell of cinnamon.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't snort cinnamon socially or anything like that?
No, nothing like that at all.
You don't have a particularly bad cocaine dealer?
I don't have a cocaine dealer, full stop.
Right, very glad to hear it, Toff. I'd be reporting you to the relevant authorities immediately if you did. I'm just trying to think of how else cinnamon might have been introduced into your nasal passages.
Well, it's a quandary, hence why I've called.
All right, you're on. Okay, it's on the board. Thank you, Toff. Shall we try and find out? I mean, I'd be frankly staggered if anyone has got the answer to that question, or unless it is a recognisable condition, and there are half a dozen other people listening to, well, more than half a dozen to be a recognisable condition, but a significant number of other people claiming that the same thing has happened to them. David said, he's just written, James, this bloke has rung in about this before. No, he hasn't. I'd remember that. Keith would remember that if I didn't. One of us would remember that. Seems unlikely. That would be a Well, I suppose the message might have arrived a bit late. It could have been another caller. Rob's in Leeds. Rob, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on, Rob.
Hoping this is not going to win the award for most ridiculous question of the week, but here goes. Deep sea creatures.
Oh, yes.
Why don't they explode when they get dredged up or caught in nets and brought to the surface?
Because of the pressure that they can withstand down below, you'd imagine that when that pressure wasn't there, they would expand in a way that would translate quickly into an explosion. Yeah.
I'm thinking, I've got in my mind like giant squid type creatures, or some gelatinous
cephalod. Is it a cephalod? What's the one in H.G. Wells called? Anyway, same here. I've now got a giant squid in my mind. Get out of my mind, giant squid. Cephalopod.
Is it blobfish or something?
Cephalopod, mate. We're going with a cephalopod.
Okay.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it comes to the surface, and is it because they're not? They don't have any spines. They don't like the way they're made. I don't know, mate.
I don't know.
Nor do I now. I've got thinking about it. Blobfish. Yeah, you're on. Okay.
All right. Cheers.
No, cheers. Nice one. There you go. Ali's in Guildford. Ali, question or answer?
Question, please, James. How are you?
I'm very well. Is that it?
Yeah, that's
all right,
it.
round of applause for me, Keith, please. Thank you very much. That's the easiest round of applause I've ever got on Mystery Hour. All right, I'll see you next week, Ali. Alan's in Faversham. No, come back. I'm only joking. Carry on with your question, Ali.
Yeah, you might not like this question, but I don't think it is a motoring question, but I'd give it to you anyway. So how do you determine top of the road? So when someone says, meet me at the top of the road. Now, I understand if the road is on a hill.
Right.
And obviously you've got the top and bottom, but if the road is flat and is connected to two main roads, right? Yeah. Again, if it was a dead end, you'd say obviously it would be at the beginning of the road, right? At the start of the road.
Yeah.
So how would you determine top of the road if it's connected to two main roads from each side?
Well, I mean, you wouldn't.
Why not?
Because the other fellow would go, where do you mean?
Well, no, because if you haven't been to that road, no.
Yes.
So
you say the top of the road when it's obvious where the top of the road is, and you don't say it when it isn't.
Well, okay, let's say we both haven't been to this road, but we're just naming a road.
Yeah.
And
when I say meet me at the top of the road, and you say, what are you talking about, you idiot? How do I know what you mean by the top of the road?
I've never had that conversation with anyone who said, I mean, I don't think anyone would ask that question. I mean,
top of the road is going to be like number one, like the first house on the road.
Yeah, so you can argue it could be number one, but then again, some roads, they don't have that on one side. They have different numbers.
If you can identify the beginning and the end of the road, then the top of the road is the beginning of the road and the end of the road is the end of the road. But if you can't identify the beginning and the end of the road, then you can't possibly distinguish between the top of the road and the rest of the road. So no one would refer to the top of the road in the absence of the ability to distinguish between the end of the road and the beginning of the road.
Okay, all right. I mean, I'll take your word for it, but
what do you mean you'll take my word for it? This is logic in action.
No, we've had this before, James. I called him one time before, and
you're a serial offender, aren't you?
No. It's only because I don't want to embarrass you again like last time. That's
a likely story. A likely story. So it's the first bit of the road that you get to.
Yeah, but
depending on the direction that you're coming from.
Yeah, but then the other person could be coming.
But then you can't talk about the top of the road, can you?
Okay, fine, but I'm still not taking that.
All right, I'll put it on the board. How do we know where the top of the road is? Get an answer to that. I'll give you the money myself. Alan's in Faversham. Alan, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on, Alan.
What is the point of checking in online when you're travelling? Because back in the day, when you checked in, it meant you'd arrived in time for your flight.
Yeah.
You proved you got the right documentation, and you've sent your bag on its journey to the hold. But now when you check in online, literally nothing has changed from before you checked in to after you've checked in.
Except that you don't have to queue.
Well, you do. I mean, it's just all queues in the airport, isn't it?
Well, so this is either a brilliant question or a rubbish one, isn't it? Because I think I've wondered this myself in the past. Also, I've wondered if I've checked in online, and I don't turn up because I get on the wrong train or I get stuck in traffic or something like that, am I causing more trouble than I would have done if I hadn't checked in at all?
Well, exactly. Whereas in the old days, if you haven't checked in, it meant you haven't arrived at the airport.
But, it means that you don't queue up to get a boarding pass. So you still need to present your boarding pass to get through customs. And if you've got a lot of luggage with you... Oh, no, and also, mate, come on, it's obvious. I'll wait.
What?
I'll wait.
No, go on.
No, I'm waiting. You've got to work it out. Think about it.
I've no idea. I mean, I've just flown. I had to queue to check my bag in myself.
Yeah, I know. That's not the point. Think about it.
I don't know.
Where do you want to sit?
Yeah, but I've checked into a flight
Where
already.
Do you want to sit? Where do you want to sit?
I'm going to Oviedo. I've already checked in.
Yeah.
And I haven't had to choose my seat. I'm waiting to get a free seat when all the other seats are taken.
Well, that's an abnormal experience. Normally, you choose your seat when you check in, don't you? It's like buying a theatre ticket or a cinema ticket.
Yeah, but you don't have to choose a seat.
So
it's the same.
Well, then you're a fool, aren't you? If you're not choosing a seat, but then you're rendering the entire process redundant and pointless.
Well, it is redundant and pointless.
No, it's not, because it offers you the opportunity to pick a seat.
Yeah, but you don't. Yeah, it's an opportunity, but you don't have to take it.
No, but it's there for people who aren't like you and recognise the wisdom of picking a seat.
But I'm only going to be sitting on that seat for an hour. I don't really care where it is.
You do. You might want to be next to the window. You might want to be an aisle, and they can't have a different rule for short flights. It's the new rule. So look, they reduce staff. This is a definitive answer. Pay attention. They reduce staff by no longer having people queuing up for their boarding passes, and they enhance the passenger experience by letting passengers choose where they're going to sit. It means that the whole family can sit together, and it means that the earlier you check in, the more choice you have, and the more likely you are to get the seat that you're. Just because you don't want to choose where you sit doesn't make a mockery of the whole process, Alan.
Well, it does, because when in the old days you didn't choose. You didn't choose your seat. You gave them your ticket, and they gave you a boarding pass with a seat number on it.
Yes, and you'd be stuck somewhere where you didn't want to sit. You wouldn't get a window or an aisle. You'd just be sitting at any old place, and you'd have queued up for your boarding pass as well, which would have been inconvenient for you and more expensive for the airline or the airport.
Why can't you just choose a seat when you book the flight?
In case you don't check in. I think it's right though. It might sound a bit daft. If you don't do it, there it is. It's to choose the seat. Oh, sometimes it costs extra to choose the seat, doesn't it? But originally they introduced it.
Well, that's why I haven't chosen the seat because
they wanted extra.
I'm going to get a seat anyway. Why would I pay for a seat now when I can just get a seat when I get there?
I think Mrs. O'Brien turned up at an airport once when she had checked in online, hadn't selected a seat, and the plane was oversubscribed. Is that possible?
That's possible, yeah.
So, and do all airlines charge more, or just the budget ones to pick a seat?
Well, only fly budget ones now. So
yeah, well, most people do these days.
I can't afford, and half the places are the other.
Well, now Jim's turned up to throw a spanner in the works. He says, I've pre-booked my seats, but I haven't checked in yet.
Well, there you go.
I know. This is insane. All right, what's the point of checking in online?
All right, thank you.
Why didn't you just say that in the first place? It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Who decides the international dialing codes? Why does a rich tea biscuit soften quicker in colder tea? Why do flies fly around the room in the way that they do, apparently sort of circling the light fix fitting? I've done the microwaves one, I think. Why do toffs sneeze a smell of cinnamon? Why don't sea monsters... I've written down sea monsters. No one else said sea monsters, did they? Why don't creatures that can survive the incredible pressure that is exerted upon them in the deep explode when they come to the surface? How do you know where the top of the road is? Flipping alley. And why do we check online? What's the point of checking in online? Is that all of them? It's not bad, actually. I've kept notes this week. Grant's in Bracknell. Grant, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Grant.
It's the answer to the flies.
Oh, yes.
So the flies that you see flying around in the middle of rooms, predominantly in the summertime, are male flies.
Yes.
And they are establishing their territory and ward off other males.
Really? So they're saying this is my patch?
Exactly that. They tend to go around like lamps or lights, things like that. So that's the area that they've established as their own. Sometimes you'll see flies flying around together and they'll slightly like bump into each other, and they'll have like a little wrestle, and that's males fighting for the territory, basically.
So the fly in this case is probably marking out the whole room and flying in a way that just avoids hitting the walls.
Exactly that, and they tend to fly in zigzags or in 90-degree angles to also avoid predators, harder to catch.
Is that right? Qualifications?
That's correct, yeah. I own a pest control company.
Oh, wow. How's business?
Yes, it's pretty busy, to be honest.
Buzzing?
Yeah, it will be in a few weeks when the wasps come out.
How many years have you been doing it? I find your work fascinating. I don't know if you know that. How many years have you been doing it?
So this will be my 24th year.
Oh, we're pretty much contemporaries. How, I suppose you could say I work in pest control as well some days. How, over those 24 years, has it stayed more or less the same? Like, as in the pests that you're dealing with, or have any diminished and some have, like, come up faster?
I would say rats are always on the increase.
Really?
And bed bugs seem to...
More than 24 years ago, you've got more bed bugs and more rats.
I would say so. I don't know if it's because people are becoming more aware of it, but it's definitely an increase.
Anything in retreat? Anything that you're getting on top of?
No, not really. Wherever you get people, you get pests. So it's pretty much...
Is that your motto?
Well, I think it's most pest control.
I like that a lot. Do you want to give yourself a free advert, Grant, or are you all right?
Yes, please.
Carry on.
So, based in Bracknell, Woodrush Pest Control, 24 years experience. Any problems, give us a call.
Wherever you get people, you get pests.
You get pests.
Round of applause for Grant. I like that. I don't know why I find that work so fascinating. But I genuinely do. Richard is in Tunbridge Wells. Richard, question or answer?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
biscuits.
Biscuits. Go on.
Would you like to know about biscuits?
I would, yes.
So a biscuit is dry, water is wet. Through osmosis, the water wants to get into the dry.
Not bad, nearly. That was much better, Keith. Well done. Sorry, carry on, Richard.
Yeah, that's the only reason I called up, in all fairness. But everything wants to, like, balance to the mean.
Yeah.
So water wants to go where dry stuff is. Dry stuff wants to absorb the water. But if you look at you've just boiled the kettle, you've made a really hot steaming cup of tea, and there's steam coming up top of it. The water molecules are wanting to get to where is drier, which is the air.
Yeah.
So they're choosing the easiest route.
Yeah.
Which is just to go into the air.
Yeah.
So if you dunk a biscuit in that, there'll still be some that goes, so let's go into this. But if you have a room temperature cup of water, the water is just like, well, we've got nowhere else to go.
There's no steam. There's no, so it's all going in.
There's no other escape route.
What a brilliant answer.
So it's like, hey, biscuit, let's go there.
Yeah.
And,
come on, lads.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like, guys, I've just seen this thing. Let's go and do it.
And they pile in on the biscuit, and it gets soggier much quicker, whereas the other cup of tea over there that's just been poured, a lot of the lads are just rushing out into the atmosphere via steam.
That's exactly it.
This is good, man. Qualifications?
Via osmosis, which... Thank you.
Qualifications?
I ran a tea shop for 2 years, and I observed how many, like, when you get, if you've got the crumbly little biscuits that all like kind of sludge at the bottom of a cup.
Are we sure that
I am sure. My name is Richard Shaw.
Oh, well played. You are sure, but is it? I mean, does it actually? Is there a semi-permeable membrane involved in what you've described?
Well, that's a question that I'm not qualified to answer.
Fair enough. I don't know that there is, but it doesn't matter because you've got yourself a rate. I mean, it may not have been the O word, actually, but the process you've described sounds completely plausible. So, round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw. Mind how you go. 12:38 is the time. Graham is in Bromley. Graham, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, mate.
Do dogs have blood groups? So I was watching Cross the other week with my missus, and a dog was on there, and they were talking about how it's gives blood to other dogs. The dogs have accidents to say, they obviously need blood, but it didn't explain whether they have blood groups. And so, yeah, there you are.
That's all right, isn't it?
One out there.
That's all right. I like that. Yeah, I mean, I can't. I'm just sort of thinking of whether or not we've had it before, but it doesn't matter because I haven't got a Scooby-Doo. And that isn't a dad joke. That was an accident. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. That was really bad. Yeah, all right, you're on. So do dogs have blood groups? And therefore, if you do have blood banks for dogs, whether or not you have particularly rare ones that vets are always keen to get hold of. Thank you, Graham. 12:39 is the time. Darren's in Yeovil. Darren, question or answer?
I've got an answer.
Carry on then.
It's the one about the sea creatures.
Oh, yes.
There's a couple of points to this. The first is that water is incompressible. So a creature that's made almost entirely of water is not going to get compressed, and therefore like
a giant jellyfish.
No expansion or contraction. Well, actually, most sea creatures. I mean, as humans, we're mostly made of water. Don't forget. We've only got a few air spaces that we have to manage when we go in the water. Secondly, many fish have what are called swim bladders, which they expand and contract themselves to move themselves around in the water. So that they can move up and down themselves. There's a scientist called Richard Pyle who was doing some experiments, and he was bringing fish to the surface to take back to the lab or whatever, and he was noticing they were all dying. So he stopped partway up on the dives and drained off their swim bladders with a syringe, and he found they survived, and he could conduct his experiments more effectively.
Wow.
Interestingly enough, that then turned out into he found he felt better, and now a lot of dive computers have things that were traditionally called pile stops, which are as a result of the work he did because he felt better on those dives, and they found that actually even when we don't need to stop, sometimes it helps us to do so.
Well, this is a wonderful answer. What are your qualifications?
I'm a scuba diving instructor.
Oh, well, of course you are. Have a round of applause.
Thank you.
Have you ever? There's a reason I'm. Have you ever been scuba diving in Antibes?
No, I haven't.
No, I didn't think you would have done. It would have been. I just just a little memo to self to say hello to two people listening in on Antibes. I got a lovely message the other day from an old mate of mine called Permjot, who said, "I'm in Antibes now. I spend this part of the year in the south of France, February and March. It's all right for some, isn't it, to avoid the Canadian winter?" And he went to a local bistro, or perhaps even a brasserie, I'm not sure which. And every Thursday, two lads in Antibes called Will and Leo have lunch together while listening to Mystery Hour. That's living the dream, isn't it? That is, I was about to say the Dolce Vita, but that would be Italy. So isn't that lovely? They take their lunch every Thursday at the same time to make sure that they can listen to Mystery Hour together. What an absolutely lovely thing that is. And I also have to say thank you to the lad that rang in last week to answer the question about garlic turning blue. Because his qualifications were, as you will remember, that he had a hot sauce company, and we managed to crash their website because so many people went to have a look at the hot sauce company website and then happily bought some hot sauce. And then he sent me some, and Keith and Eleanor and Rebecca. Everyone got a jar. So thank you. I've forgotten his name. Is it Paul? Thank you, hot sauce man. We'll go with that, shall we? That works for me. Thank you, hot sauce guy. I don't really like this because I think it speaks of two-tier Mystery Hour. But Johnny Vaughan has sent me a message, my colleague here at Global Radio, to say that roads are always numbered towards the centre of a town and the top of the road is the highest numbered. But he doesn't reveal what his qualifications are. And frankly, along with Chris Moyles, I'm not sure about these Radio X presenters trying to muscle in on Mystery Hour territory. It feels a little bit colonial to me, but we shall see whether or not there are qualifications in place on that one. Andy's in Morden. Andy, question or answer?
I've got a question for you, James.
Carry on, Andy.
I was talking to a musician recently, and he was saying that his brother played in a British Army band, and I believe it was in one of the household division bands, but that he wasn't a soldier. He was a musician, a civilian that was in army uniform to make up the numbers. Is there any truth in that?
Well, you think your friend might have been yanking your chain?
Well, I've never heard of that before. I've always thought that if you're in the army playing in an army band, then you will be a member of the army.
So, do military bands have ringers?
Civilian players in them,
Civilian stand-ins.
Yeah, where they can't fill that position for a particular instrument.
What did your friend play?
I prefer not to say, just in case somebody from MI5 is listening to this or something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
No, so the fellow I was talking to was a choral director.
Right.
But I believe his brother played a brass instrument.
Okay, we'll just go with brass instrument then, because that'll keep MI5 in the dark.
Yeah.
Okay. Trombone?
Tuba? French horn?
It's 1:45. Do civilians play in military bands? Because they need to keep the number. You need to have the proper mix of instruments. It's a weird one. I'll find out for you, Andy. I can see why you're suspicious, actually. It does sound a little bit odd. Because you're not going to go... where does the military band get deployed? You're not going to go to, Iraq, are you, to play some Holst or something? Anyway, the number you need to answer all of the questions that remain on the board is, altogether now, 0345 606097
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:47. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm a bit... I don't know, that question has got your interest, hasn't it? Callum says, Army top brass, don't like disclosing civilian trumpeters. And Jonathan said that was an asking for a friend question. Your man is planning on infiltrating the military. I don't know. Sounded strange to me. We haven't done international dialing codes. We've done flies, we've done biscuits. Why do Toff sneezes smell of cinnamon? We've done sea monsters. Top of the road. Could give... You're not allowed to text answers in, even if you're Johnny Vaughan, but he might have nailed it. What's the point of checking in online? Do dogs have their own blood groups? And can civilians play in military bands? If you can answer any of those, you know what to do. Kerr is in Aberdeen. Kerr, question or answer?
Well, it's an answer, James, and I wish to take issue with Mr. Smartfree's tea shop with his crackpot theory about tea biscuits and hot and cold tea, if you don't mind.
No, you carry on. Steward's inquiry, is it, Kerr?
Well, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Go on.
Okay, so I do this all the time, trying to explain to undergraduate students the unusual solution properties of starchy polymers.
Right.
That's the starting point. It's counterintuitive, James, because most people would understand that if you took a spoonful of sugar and put it in cold water, it would dissolve quite readily. And if you put it in hot water, it would dissolve much quicker.
Yes.
More, you could actually dissolve more sugar, like if you were making sugar syrup, and that's about something in science called solubility limit.
Yes.
However, these starchy polymers, like a lot of natural polymers, have both hydrophobic and hydrophilic qualities. Now, I know your classic knowledge. I'll give you a literal translation of the term hydrophobic.
I know what it means. It means repelling water.
Absolutely. So, in actual fact, water's pretty aggressive as a solvent.
Right.
Starch will dissolve. Parts of starch, anyway, the soluble parts will dissolve. This is true of a lot of natural polymers.
Okay.
However, there are little groups attached to these polymer chains that are very hydrophobic.
Ah.
And what happens is that as you put it into hot water, the hydrophobic parts try to get away from the hot water, if I could animate it for a moment in your mind.
I can see it.
And the cluster in very tight clusters, and we call this phenomenon hydrophobic attraction.
And that explains why the biscuit is not getting soggy.
Correct. It's less soluble in hot water than it is in cold water. And I think if I can just briefly give you a brief anecdote that you may be able to identify with.
60 seconds maximum.
Okay.
No, I love this. So you have come on here with your PhD in chemistry to challenge the bloke who ran a tea shop.
Absolutely.
Richard, who was, of course, also Shaw. But in order to establish precisely why a rich tea biscuit gets soggier quicker in colder tea.
Now, James, caveat, please, if you don't mind. I haven't actually tested this theory.
You don't need to, mate. That's science, isn't it?
I think it would probably work.
Round of applause for Kerr. I'll tell you what, I bet old Neil didn't know he was going to be opening this box of frogs when he rang in with that question. Thank you, Kerr. Lovely stuff. Andrew's in... I had a crack at Llanelli yesterday and everyone laughed at me. So, is it Gwyneth?
Yeah, Gwyneth.
Gwyneth?
Yeah.
Question or answer?
I've got an answer, I think.
Go on.
Okay, so answer to Toff's cinnamony sneezes.
Yes.
I'm a junior doctor out in North Wales, and I quite like having a go at trying to explain these weird symptoms that usually aren't something you get in a textbook. So, first of all, the sneeze is mostly, its physiological purpose is to discharge the debris that accumulates in the nasopharynx and the oropharynx, so that bit behind your nose, behind your mouth. But when you sneeze, most of what's coming out is partially that, but mostly stuff that's in your mouth, less so your nose. Obviously, you both had talked about whether or not he might have been snorting cinnamon or some slightly dodgy cocaine.
Yes.
But I think probably what's happening is what's causing the smell is something that's in his mouth or in his breath. So there's two explanations. I don't think you're going to get to the bottom of a definitive answer.
But he might have been eating biscuits or something that's got cinnamon in it.
That's one option, is that cinnamaldehyde is quite frequently used in a variety of flavourings. I had a quick look at that online.
Oh, yeah.
So potentially...
That's allowed because you're supporting a theory. You're not looking up the answer.
Yeah.
That's different. That's research, that is, not cheating.
And the immediate thing that I thought to myself when I first heard him talk about it is actually that, I don't know how common knowledge this is, but ketosis... is quite notably can often give you a very sweet smelling breath. That's the consequence of you being low on sugar in your body.
So you might have a bit of ketosis. You might have a bit of ketosis going. Glucose, isn't it?
Yes,
Glucose shortage.
Yeah, exactly. And because that produces quite a prominent sweet smelling breath, I think that might be the more likely cause.
Well,
if you look it up online, it might start telling you things about having diabetes and things. I think that's not necessarily likely to be the case because...
but better safe than sorry, eh? Better safe than sorry, Toff. You might want to get that looked into. I mean, this isn't really a place for medical advice, but you are a doctor and you have done some research, and that could be the explanation for why...
Yeah, I was more wanting to reassure him if he sees that online. I don't think that's probably the cause, because if he was in diabetic ketoacidosis, he'd be a lot more sicker. He'd be probably rushed to hospital at that point.
He sounded fine.
He'd be rushed to hospital if he was in DKA.
Yeah, everyone relax. That's all good. Qualifications, doctor?
Yes, junior doctor, albeit. So, there might be some GPs or endocrinologists that have a better example.
Leave it. Don't be so modest. Take the win, Andrew. Seriously, here it is.
Cheers, man.
No, lovely stuff. I like that a lot. Thanks for putting the work in as well. That's nice, that. Matthew's in Richmond. Matthew, question or answer?
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, Matthew.
It's an answer to the army musician question.
Oh, yes.
And I would say it's completely untrue.
Wow.
There are not civilians employed just to play music in the army.
Not even like on a one-off for a concert if someone was sick?
No, I think you might call in an army reserve musician.
Right.
That certainly happens, but you're more likely to just borrow from one of the other bands, especially if you're in one of the household division bands.
Yeah.
So
I wonder what was going on there then. It was because it all went a bit mysterious towards the end, didn't it? When he was giving it the stuff about MI5. Why would his mate have told him that he played? His brother played in a military band despite being a civilian.
Yeah, I don't know of that at all. But one thing I would say is that army musicians don't tend to be that sort of soldier-like.
No.
Tend to be a bit more sensitive.
I'm glad you used that word. Qualifications?
I spent over 20 years as a professional tuba player in the British Army.
A professional what player?
Tuba.
That's interesting, because I think he was talking about the tuba. Dropped a cut. I mean, reading between the lines, I think he accidentally let the tuba out of the bag when he talked earlier.
Yeah, I might have known his brother.
I love that. Well played. Literally.
Nice
Round of applause. That was an accident as well, like the Scooby-Doo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The buzz thing with the pest controller, that was deliberate. Ken's in Tynemouth. Ken, question or answer?
Hi. Answer with regards to the international dialing codes.
Oh, yes, please.
It's the International Telecommunications Union that issue dialing codes for international countries.
Is it?
And they're a division of the United Nations based in Geneva.
Well, I never. Qualifications?
31 years as a post office telecommunications BT manager.
What country has 31 as its international dialing code?
Gosh.
Come on, Ken, for the win.
It'll be somewhere in Europe.
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, Susan.
Top of the road.
Top of the road, yes.
Top of the road is the highest number. When you see the numberings on the streets, number one is the nearest to the town.
Yes.
Wherever you are, whichever road. So the top of the road is the furthest number away. I used to live at number 111.
Oh, yes.
And my friends, this is going back to about 1958, my friends would always come and meet me at the top of the road.
Qualifications?
I've just known this since I was about 7. I'm now 73.
So 67 years of knowledge. But what if you were wrong when you were 7? What if you were wrong when you were 7?
No, I was right. I tell you something, James, I'm always right.
So no, that's
And
me.
I've been
I'm always
listening
right,
to you.
Susan. I'm always right, Susan.
No, I'm always right.
No, I'm always
I've
right.
been listening to you since you started in 2003.
Oh, well, in that case, you probably do know everything by now. Round of applause for Susan. It's 66 years of knowledge, not 67. Last word on this. Can I squeeze in Tim in Godalming? Tim, question or answer?
Hi, James. I've got an answer.
Go on, then.
Okay, boarding passes.
Yes.
There's 3 perfectly good reasons. If you use an app when you fly, like most regular flyers do for work,
yes.
You've only got hand luggage, then you want to get the boarding pass onto your iPhone or other phone and avoid getting the paper one. So you want to avoid the queue. So you don't want to go and check to the check-in desk.
So it's for your convenience, number one.
Yep, and then once you've got the boarding pass on your phone, you can go straight through security without having to do anything with luggage.
And also you get to choose your seat often, but not always.
And, of course, you get to confirm your seat in advance.
Qualifications?
Flown a lot with work. Used to fly about 3 times a week. And
I don't know what Alan was confused about. I don't know what Alan was so confused about. Just because he chose not to do it didn't mean that wasn't the reason why the option existed. Anyway, thank you, Tim. Great work. If you, I'm going to give the. Do you know why I'm going to give the mystery out ball game to Alan? Does anyone know? Can anyone guess? He laughed at my jokes with such enthusiasm and sincerity that
You're so shallow.
I know. It warmed the cockle. You do not, Keith. You do the opposite. It warmed the cockles of my heart, she.
Was it a dad joke or was it a good joke?
There were dad jokes in there, but also some quite off-the-cuff banter.
Okay.
So anyway, well done, Alan. You win a mystery ad ball game. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily. The best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now, it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.